Councilmember Dodwell,
Here.
Councilmember Nyan,
Here.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Here.
Councilmember Gross, Councilmember Clark, Councilmember Eden,
Here.
Councilmember Remy, Councilmember Farmer,
Here.
Councilmember Galani, Councilmember McCune, Councilmember Rambo, Councilmember McCutcheon.
Okay, thank you and welcome. For those of you who are in the chambers, if you could please turn your volume down so we don't get the reverb that allows the public to hear better, would appreciate that. No mayor comments or announcements. Under informational items, we have 8 before we move to action. Is there anything under information that any member of the council would like to speak to or about which you may have a question? Councilmember Edens.
Yes, it's not especially on the document provided with number 2 under B, Planning and Parks Committee. I was just wondering if we were successful in getting the Ward 2 park added back to the 5-year parks plan. I learned recently, and I'm saying this for the benefit of other council members, that Ward 2 had a park designed. So that's already been paid for and was to be constructed around 2008. And then with the economic downturn and mortgage crisis, it didn't get built. So since then, other projects have moved up and we were actually on the list quite a bit ago. So I'm not asking for it to be worked into the budget next fiscal year. I would just like it added back to the plan.
So, Councilor Eden, was this what you raised at the admin public works meeting?
I can't remember if I did, but probably.
Okay.
There was no action on this item that Ms. Edens is speaking about.
Okay.
My understanding was it would be added through the Planning and Parks Committee and not admin. So I just wondered if it was, in fact, in the plan already.
Mr. Vinich?
Ms. Edens, it is not yet, but we have to make a couple of adjustments to the 5-year plan. And that came out of the Planning and Parks Committee meeting last Tuesday night. And so there'll be an opportunity to consider it.
Okay, so my one more follow-up for Mr. Vernich. How do I go about doing that? Is that something that Councilmember Bartoni will take care of as he's on that committee? Or does it need to come from a work session in council?
I don't believe it needs to come from tonight's work session. The fact that it's been brought to the attention of City Council and the mayor, as well as Ms. Kaiser and Mr. Cross, we'll make sure that as I said, we're already looking at a couple items in the 5-year plan. We can certainly add this for consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor McCune?
Okay, can you hear me? I'm sorry. I just have a question on the deer population count and the proposal for the money that is on the memo. So that equals about $55 or $55 per hour for each officer. I wasn't able to review that last approval. Was that money allocated already, or was this a new proposal?
Rick?
Mr. Mayor, I prefer to defer to Captain Mundell if he's available, but the plan is to use police and use their overtime budget for this year in 2020. So this matter was discussed at the Board of Public Safety, and it was felt that the money was available in the 2020 budget to undertake this count yet this year.
So Rick, I just have a follow-up. Why would we do the count during the peak of deer season right now? Don't we have a bunch of hunters and things, and that would be kind of risky? Is that not correct?
No, actually, this is the ideal time to do it, and that's why it's come up, is because we really like to get the count done starting basically in November of this year when the deer are active. So if we don't move and don't move forward with the count this fall, we'll lose that opportunity for another year.
Okay, and so let's say that we get the count. So just to follow up, we have these numbers. Do we have anything budgeted to even, or a plan to manage the deer control from this point? Because I know that Town and Country, other cities have tried to approach this, and it's like a 10-year process for them to kind of even get it under management. So I just don't want to waste money today for this year when we could maybe apply that money somewhere else. And then we don't have a plan or funding to move this forward, because it's not just a one-time, whatever you guys decide to do to manage the population. So I just want to make sure that we're using this money wisely, because I think that's a lot of money just to have people go out count deer.
Understood. And I would mention that previously we completed a count in 2018. So this will build off of that count. And I guess the most important thing is that the data that's obtained will feed directly into the deer management plan. We do have a draft of that plan, and it has been presented so far to Admin Public Works. But this data will be very helpful in providing more context and addressing questions of that plan relative to cost and the magnitude of the issue, the population issue of the deer that we have in Wildwood.
So Rick, if I could, or said differently, isn't the bottom line that, I think the premise of Councilmember Kuhn's question was that action is going to be taken regardless of what this survey or the deer count project shows. But in fact, isn't it the case that that's the whole purpose for doing it? I mean, theoretically, it may demonstrate that there is nothing that needs to be done or that can be done, correct?
Well, I think as I said before, we have one count from 2018, which is only covering about 5 square miles of the city of Wildwood. So our data up to this point is fairly limited relative to the overall geographic footprint. By completing this additional count, we will have covered about half of the city of Wildwood. So it'll give us a much better vantage point with which to move forward relative to issues of deer population control and the need to do that.
So Rick, I'm going to ask it again, but I mean, if the count comes back and shows that, and I don't think this is going to be the case as a practical matter, but just at least in theory, if the count comes back and shows that the deer population isn't nearly what we thought it was, that would change the analysis of whether we spend any money on doing anything at that point, correct?
That's correct. It would provide clarity to that issue or that concern, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Councilmember McCune? Okay, thanks. Councilmember Clark.
Or just a brief update on where they're at with the Shiloh and Homestead project. Do we have those updates?
So I think there may have been a problem with Councilmember Clark's microphone, which we're fixing at the moment. Joe, her question was, she had asked, or her statement was, she had asked Bay's ET to give an update periodically on the Shiloh and Homestead progress relative to the fiber. Do you have an update on that at this point?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, as has been the practice of the department, we have an update report as part of today's agenda. Bay's ET has made significant progress in the Homestead Estates subdivision, and they were moving into Shiloh with the hope of beginning that in the mid to latter part of October. Mr. Bay, Chris Bay, who owns the company, came down with COVID-19 and has been quarantined at home. And so progress has slowed substantially due to his illness. Residents, as well as the trustees of the Homestead Estates subdivision, has contacted him, and he hopes to get back at it this November as soon as possible.
And Joe, do we, at the end of the day, do we have an ETA? I'm not going to hold you to the best guess as to when both of those rollouts will be done.
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer. Again, in estates at Homestead subdivision, Bays ET ran into a great deal more rock than what was anticipated. And so progress slowed there substantially for approximately a week to 10 days. I'm suspecting that Shiloh will create the same situation. The best news I have is Ameren, Missouri has completed their review of the aerial installations, and there are 2 to 3 poles that have to be replaced to address Ameren, Missouri's requirements for a partner on them. But that review process is complete. If I were to offer a guess, it'd probably be after the first of the year at the earliest.
Thank you. Do you have any follow-up, Councilmember Clark?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Dodwell?
I just wanted to point out to Ms. McCune's comments regarding the deer inventory, so to speak. And if you're not living in a highly deer infested area like Ward 4 or Ward 5, it may not be that important to you. But I have watched the 2 herds of deer that go through my backyard morning and evening go from 2 to 3 deer to 20 deer apiece. Okay. So I think we need to get an inventory completed regardless of our budget at this time for safety's sake. And I just want to encourage everyone to please move ahead with that process.
Thank you. Councilmember McCutcheon?
I have a question for Joe.
Do you have a target date for the Green Pines Park opening?
Ms. McCutcheon, I talked to Ken Keitel last week, the park designer and the gentleman that's been doing the construction management oversight. And we're thinking it could be as early as the beginning of next week or at the latest the following week.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to ask a question or discuss anything under information? All right, seeing none, moving to action items. We have, I believe, 3, 4, 5. Joe, Department of Planning, the Tree Preservation and Restoration Code update.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, the Department of Planning has been holding conversations with Dr. Rambo, a member of City Council, about the Sustainable Planning's Guide and the Landscape Manual that are part of the Tree Preservation and Restoration Code. Given Dr. Rambo's background and educational experiences, the department took to heart many of the things that he identified that were potentially problematic with those documents, as well as the code itself. Knowing that the City of Wildwood is always attempting to address shortfalls in its ordinances or codes, the department submitted to the Planning and Parks Committee a request to consider having the Planning and Zoning Commission review the Tree Preservation and Restoration Code, the Landscape Manual, and the Sustainable Planning's Guide. That review can only be initiated by the Planning and Zoning Commission itself or City Council. The Planning and Parks Committee did support that review, knowing the importance of trees to our Wildwood residents and everyone that's on this Zoom webinar, as well as being a tree city for many years now. So tonight, the Department of Planning is respectfully requesting that the City Council authorize the posting of this matter before the Planning and Zoning Commission for its consideration, discussion, and then recommendation. The intent is to have Dr. Rambo assist in the discussion and consideration of these items before the Planning and Zoning Commission, with again the hope to improve what we have and ensure that we are doing the best we can in terms of new plantings, protection of existing woodlands, and all other things in between. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joe. And one thing that I think would be helpful, if it's not too time consuming, assuming a motion is made and passes in that regard, is that if P and Z and I guess ideally the council could get a bullet point summary of sort of the key things that Dr. Rambo has identified, so that the discussion can be focused on those, because I know this is a fairly extensive body of legislation. So
I'd be glad to work with Dr. Rambo to provide that. Thank you.
okay. Someone like to make a motion to that effect? Councilmember Dodwell makes a motion. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember McCutcheon. Is there any discussion on the motion as recommended by the department? This would be a motion that the Planning and Zoning Commission be requested to review our chapter tree preservation and restoration code that's contained in chapter 410 relative to potentially improving it. Seeing no discussion, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Joe, the community park naming.
Again, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, as many of you will recall, recently the city promoted a park naming contest for the new Ward 5 park. The city engaged the residents in the vicinity of this facility, as well as the nearby school, Green Pines Elementary. The success of the naming contest was great. The city had over 400 participants and a great number of submissions for consideration. And out of that process, the Planning and Parks Committee recommended and City Council concurred with naming the new Ward 5 park Green Pines Park. With that success, the Planning and Parks Committee undertook an additional naming effort with Community Park. Community Park was never a name given by the City Council. It was just a working name for all intents and purposes, as that process started back in 2009 with its purchase of the property. Again, with the success of the naming contest for Green Pines Park, the Planning and Parks Committee agreed to do it again. And this time the results weren't as substantial, but a number of options were provided. But after discussing those options, the Planning and Parks Committee agreed unanimously to keep the name of Community Park, Community Park. And so tonight, the department is seeking a motion and second to name Community Park, Community Park. Thank you.
Well, I guess we could do it that way, but actually, if no one wants to make a motion to change the name, I think it would just stay Community Park.
Yeah, I think everybody would keep calling it that.
So we try to keep our motions in the affirmative rather than the negative. But if someone wants to make a motion to keep the name, I guess we could do it that way. But you want to, Councilmember McCutcheon?
Community Park, Community Park.
Okay, so we do have a motion to that effect. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Nyan. Any discussion on the motion? See no discussion. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any
Aye.
Any abstentions? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. So that motion passes. Okay, so now we go into the fun stuff. Not that that wasn't fun, but this is I say that facetiously. The budget for 2021. And so, councilors, what you have before you that's been provided to all of our standing committees is the draft budget. And as you know from my various references to this and mayor's reports and emails and so forth, I just want to highlight a couple of things. First of all, we have had a significant decrease in revenue essentially across all lines. And by all line items, I mean in terms of sales tax, utility tax, fines and penalties, and so forth. And as you might expect, that is largely, but not entirely, due to the COVID situation, and we are not unique from other cities. Interim City Administrator Steve Cross and Dawn and I worked extensively to do our best to present to you a balanced budget, which we have done, and which you now have a copy of. Obviously, given the decrease in revenues, we had to make tough choices. None of us wanted to make those, as did department heads, Rick and Julian and Joe, and I know they didn't want to do that either. And yet, we ultimately, as a team effort, were able to arrive at a balanced budget. And so that's what is presented to you this evening. And I guess I'll turn it over to Steve for his comments and thoughts. He has also previously served until he resigned to be city administrator as our city treasurer. So he has had extensive knowledge of our budget. And I again appreciate his help with this. And I guess, Steve, I'd be looking for not only any other comments you want to make, but also what you might want to want the council to do at this point. I know there were a couple of, my understanding is there were a couple of recommendations for additional expense that came out of the Admin Public Works Committee meeting, and we can handle those now if that's appropriate. So Steve, what is your, do you have any thoughts to, comments to add, and what do you recommend the council does at this point with respect to the budget?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You've very well summed up all the work that we had done to this point. And as you pointed out, we are presenting to the council a balanced budget at this point in time. Finance Officer Dawn Kaiser and I met with each of the standing committees to go over the budget, not only the operating expenditure budget, but the capital improvements budget. You may recall that at the last council meeting, we presented the preliminary revenue projections. So today, we are addressing the operating expenditures and the capital improvements budget. We did meet, as I said, with the standing committees. The results of those committees, in the case of the Board of Public Safety, they initially had proposed some additional funds to be added to the budget. That was discussed, and through the use of Prop P reserves, we were able to accommodate those additional expenditures that they added to the budget. So in essence, we still had a balanced budget, and they approved their budget. We also met with the Economic Development Committee, presented the budget, and that was approved as presented in a balanced manner. Same with Planning and Parks. We presented, and Mr. Vunich very eloquently presented the budget and the tough decisions that he and his staff had to make with regards to having a balanced budget, and they were able to do so. And therefore, the budget that was presented was in fact voted on at that committee and passed. And then we met finally with the Administration and Public Works Committee, and we went through the same process. At that time, there were a number of recommendations made to add some additional dollars to the budget, which would then take us out of a balanced situation. So they voted, and it was approved to add some additional dollars to the budget. At this point in time, I would like to ask Mr. Garetano, the chair of the Administration and Public Works Committee, to discuss those changes and see how the council wants to go forward with that. Mr. Garetano? So
before we do that, Steve, if I could, I think what we're going to be looking for ultimately is a motion from the council to move forward and to have the legislation prepared for the next meeting. Is this correct?
Yes, sir, it is, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, for adoption of the budget. So, and that budget may be as presented or it may be as amended. So that's ultimately where we're going to get to here momentarily. And Joe, with that in mind, I believe there were, just so we can hone the discussion, I believe there were 2 items. Is that 3 items?
There are 2 items that are related to the operating budget, and then 1 from the capital improvements fund.
Okay, so the one thing I want to mention, just to put this in perspective, is that the revenue side of the equation, which we have looked at exhaustively, we do not think can be increased realistically to accommodate anything further. We've pushed that to the limit. We want to stay conservative with that. So what that means is we're left with two options if either of these are approved. Option one is they come from another program that's in the budget that you decrease, or option two, it comes from reserves. So those are the two options. Joe, with that.
Okay, sure. Well, then what I'll do is cover and explain or provide you the outcome of what the committee voted on. So the first item, and I'm going to speak to the capital improvement, if that's appropriate. We'll do that one first. I'm doing it in the order that it was discussed at the meeting. So there was a discussion over an amendment of $125,000 for the 2022 budget for the watershed erosion. So that would be moved to 2021 and then reviewed at mid-year for an additional 125,000 if available.
So for a total of 250 ultimately?
Well, I think that mid-year is if available, so it would be revisited at mid-year. So at this time, the committee is making the change for 125,000 for watershed erosion. And I can ask Councilmember Remy, he was the maker of the motion. Councilmember Bros seconded. He could probably explain the reasoning for that, if that's okay, Mayor.
Well, why don't we, so really the motion then would just be on the, what may happen at mid-year, and by the way, I'm glad you brought up mid-year, because if the situation financially improves, and we, as we always do, look at things roughly at mid-year, we can always adjust not only this issue, this program, but others, but that's down the road. So the only thing on the table tonight would be for the 125. And to just get it on the floor, Councilor Remy, would you like to make a motion to get that on the floor, and then that way we can discuss it?
Sure, I'll make the motion to, as Councilmember Garetano mentioned, add $125,000. And if there's a second, I'm happy to talk about the rest.
Okay, and before we get a second, let's get in the motion. Do you want that coming from reserves or another program? And if it's from another program, what other program?
We have to delineate right now we just have to approve the cost. We could probably deal these in two separate manners, I believe, correct?
You can do that. I think you might have a greater chance of success if you, otherwise people are going to be voting on an uncertainty, but that's up to you.
For now, I'm just going to leave it as we can talk about the supply. I don't want to, I'd rather first deal with this and get it into the budget, and then we can decipher how to pay for it.
Okay, fair enough. So the motion is for 125 to be added to the capital improvement budget for the Watershed Erosion Task Force. Is there a second to the motion? Second by Councilmember Gross. Okay, go ahead, Councilmember Remy.
Yeah, so watershed erosion for the 2021 budget initially actually had an allocation of $500,000. But given the circumstances, when the budget came out, it was completely void of that for the 2021 year. And I just think that at this point, we've done a lot of work in this erosion task force, and there's an unmet need right now for us to be able to move forward with our consultants' recommendations and be able to at least provide some stopgap measures right now in the 2021 year. I suspect this is all going to be applied to development of projects that are going to directly affect city infrastructure that's at risk from some of the erosion and flooding that we've seen. And so as a significant compromise, I've reduced that amount down to $125,000 at least for year one, so that we could at least begin the process. So at least there's some allocation in the upcoming budget. So that was part of the rationale.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Councilmember Clark.
Did you have some kind of a business case for that? Do we know where the money would be going specifically, or do you have projects in mind?
Go ahead.
So we have a consultant already, Dr. David Hammer, first and foremost, who's already identified almost 20 locations that are at risk currently. Additionally, we've got a consultant that we just hired as well that's going to provide us with the movement towards a stormwater map and flood management plan. And so that money will be allocated not only to that, but it will be allocated to some of the initial stopgap measures for areas that are currently having erosion. And our plan is to solidify that in the upcoming weeks with our new consultant that'll be visiting on the beginning of November.
Okay, Councilmember McCutcheon.
These funds from, are you going to suggest that we take them from any existing allocations that are in the balanced budget?
Sure. So I'm happy to answer that question. So, we've got a couple different areas. Councilmember McCutcheon, this is a necessity. There are things on our budget currently that may not be as much of a necessity.
I can't.
But if we need to go into reserves to pay for
Ken, they're not hearing you. Can you?
Oh, sorry. You can't hear me?
You don't have to have that on.
Oh, sorry.
You're good now.
Is this better? Can you hear me now?
No, I'm on mute here. It's red.
Oh, it's not on
You
here.
can't hear me.
You can't hear you.
It's not on Zoom though.
You can't hear me right now?
I can hear you, but it's choppy. If you keep your earbuds, that might help.
Sure. Sorry about that. I'm gonna get some quick.
Better without your.
It is, right?
I don't know.
Are you able to hear me now? Okay. So the answer to your question is there was $500,000 not in the budget, and originally in the budget, and completely removed. And so there are areas of our budget currently that are less of a necessity, in my view, than perhaps the need for attacking some of the erosion problems that we're having. And so I would recommend two courses. Either, yes, we potentially put off a roundabout for a year, or we potentially pull from our reserves for the year. I think this is a necessity from all of the problems that we've demonstrated over the last year and a half. And I think we need to have at least an initial allocation of the budget this year.
So I'm still not clear. Where are you taking these funds from?
As I just mentioned, we can discuss if we're going to reduce other areas, or we can pull from the reserve, or we can go into a negative balance for this year. But this is a necessity. I don't have an answer for you. That's for us to discuss tonight.
Got
I
it.
can give some recommendations regarding if there's some allocations that we could slightly reduce regarding development of some parks, development of roundabouts. But this is a necessity.
So his motion, to clarify, was just to get approval, presumably, if it happens, for the expense, and to then hash and discuss where it's going to come from. Councilmember Dodwell.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Remy, or Dr. Remy, or Councilmember Remy, whichever title you'd like to have me refer to. I guess my question is, we already have budgeted in the 2020 budget the ability to have the consultants come in and do additional assessment, correct?
Yes.
Do you feel it's incumbent upon us to make a decision this evening? And perhaps move your request for additional funding until the 2020 timeframe? So 2021 timeframe, so that we know what it is we will be expending funds on. I'm very hesitant to approve setting aside funds with no known usage plan, project plan on how it's going to be expended, et cetera. We're just kind of tossing some money in a pot at this point from what I'm read and I'm hearing.
No. So Dr. Hammers actually came up with specific locations he thinks that we actually do need to have stopgap measures. The problem is he doesn't perform the work himself. And so we do need money set aside to do this in 2021. And this was unanimously approved by the entire admin board at the last meeting.
I understand that. I guess my question still is, any additional work that we would do on these sites will not be done or even started until after spring of 2021, correct?
No, that's not necessarily correct. So on November the 12th, our consultant will come in here and will provide us some advice on how we're going to approach some of the higher triage areas from Dr. Hammer.
And which are those triage areas that the committee has identified?
That's right. We can present that to you after the consultant comes on the 12th.
I just feel like we're kind of throwing some money out there without any true specifics associated with it. And normally when the subcommittees are bringing things before council, it has a specific definition of what it's going to be spent on, timeline on when the work is going to be completed, et cetera. And I'm a little hesitant to approve anything that does not have that associated with it.
With all due respect, there was an allocation for $500,000 in the budget already. That was removed at the balancing portion. Now, I think that was a bit aggressive based off that there are a number of projects. And in the 2021 year, we are going to have to start addressing a lot of the findings that this task force has found. Just to be clear, this is for city infrastructure that's already been delineated to have erosion issues and the development of stormwater flood plan. And the amount of erosion that's currently ongoing in the city right now is in the tune of almost $30 million, which is not going to be paid for by city funds. But this is our first step because there are areas specifically, even on Tracker Road and some other locations, that are losing over now 2 feet every 2 months. One of those is right down the street from me, where we just built a new bridge. And if we don't actually allocate the money for a stopgap measure, we're going to have more expensive problems. And so, therefore, I'd like to put this in the hands of our consultant, Dr. Hammer, and the consultant that's going to recommend potential improvements right for the beginning and mid parts of 2021 so that we can actually attack them. We can't do that if we don't have any money. We don't have enough. We don't have money.
I want to, can I ask one more question?
Sure.
City administrator, do we have the ability after January 1st and before the spring rains start to reallocate funds towards any kind of watershed erosion project should we deem it's necessary based on the information provided by the consultants over the next 2 months? Or does it have to be a mid-year?
Councilmember Godwell, the short answer is no, it does not need to wait till mid-year. If there is a source of funds that can be identified from which monies can be redeployed to this, and it is agreeable to the council, we could make that change.
Okay. I'm very concerned about putting the cart before the horse.
Councilmember Brost?
Yeah, I guess maybe I'm taking a little different approach than maybe everyone here, because I don't have necessarily a specific item. I guess some of the comments I want to make is that, you know, first and foremost, I don't feel we need to have a balanced budget. I don't think it matters whether we do our budget process and we have a surplus or a deficit. What matters is every individual line item that comprises that budget. The city is fortunate. It has substantial reserves. And we have minimum reserves. If we were near our minimum reserves, none of us would sleep at night. But what is the proper level? And when do our reserves and the management of those reserves perhaps become an injustice to the residents of Wildwood? I don't know the answer, but that is the way I think. the other thing is that, I'll just sound crazy for a second and say numbers talk to me. When you read a budget, you can form an opinion. And when I read the budget, going back to Jim's plan, they're not in sync. We recognize two items of significant concern with nothing in the budget. And I'm not disagreeing with the budget, but what I would really like to have is that maybe as a city council, we need to come up with a list, which I think the mayor's list is very good. But I think we need to come up with the list, and it could give us a guideline and a framework for how we go about approving expenditures. Because nowhere on this list is there a park. But we've got more money in the budget for 2021 for a park than we do for people losing their backyards. So I would really like to see, and I think some of these thoughts I may have mentioned to Mr. Cross, but I would really like to see us develop a list that can fit on one page, not a to-do list, of what are the real risks of the city, and get our financial budget aligned with it. And I guess the last point is, I think if we go back to, like pre-COVID and then when COVID first started, I think where we're at for the city is probably in a different position than we all anticipated. And we all may feel it's better or worse, depending on our circumstances. But one of the items that, with the high-speed internet, for example, that's only become more important. And it's not to say for everyone in Wildwood that's had other issues that it's the most important, but that remains in the forefront. And even with that, we're spending less money than other areas. And as a member of the city council, and I think as a group, I think we all need to contribute toward a list that we all buy into, and we manage from that list. And we look at the city resources, we look at city staffing, and we really start focusing on what we all agree are the greatest risks for the city. And then, the short of it is, yes, that's why I'm supporting 125,000. I mean, my gosh, we don't need a plan. We don't have a plan for internet, but we got money allocated. We have money allocated on a lot of things. We don't have a plan. That doesn't mean we're going to waste the money. But I do know along Wild Horse Creek Road, some of the work that was done there has been very helpful. And I don't think it's the Cadillac, but I think it's some stopgap work that's done well. So long answer to Dr. Remy, I do support that motion.
So I'd just like to make a point of information. I agree with you. I think it would be good for the council to have a discussion at some point philosophically and practically as to goals that it wants to achieve. One thing I would point out relative to the document you flashed there, that's the 2024 vision plan. We're in 2020 at this point. So from my view, we have, when I peg those for that list, it's a 4-year proposition. And it's just an honest, different way of looking at it. When I'm presented with a situation that has curbed revenue substantially, I'm just going to take a more conservative approach and look at some of those things next year or the year after that I might want to look at this year, including watershed. But it's for 2024. And as much as I'd like to get those done sooner rather than later, my thought at this point, obviously, in presenting the budget that we did, would be to forego some of those for a year or two until we see what revenues do. But again, there's no who's to say right or wrong. Go ahead. Yep.
I just don't agree with that, Jim. I mean, the most significant issues facing the city should be the ones that we address first. Let's not address let's tackle the big ones. And big ones are on that piece of paper. And I just think that when I saw the budget and there was no money there, it just really hit me hard. Because it's like, we've got a lot of momentum there and we just threw it out the window. I just don't agree. But I'm only one person here. And I think what's very important is, as a group, we come up with the overall plan and then we put that in action. Because I don't think we have an overall plan. I really don't, other than the mayor's sheet, which I agree with. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Bertolino. I'm sorry, I've seen, if you could, Dave, I've seen Joe Benich's hand up. Joe, I've been looking for an opportunity to call and you did, okay, good. Councilor Bertolino.
Yeah, Larry, very eloquent. I like what you said. And Dr. Remy, I really appreciate your advocacy on this issue. Personally, I think the council as a whole needs to put the total dollars available to us, given to us through taxes, et cetera, in a balanced budget. I think we owe that to our citizens, given this tremendous uncertainty that we're facing over this COVID situation. I would like to, and Ken, to that issue, I would not approve or not vote for this amendment. I think that Larry, though, has an excellent idea. I think we pass a balanced budget, and then we sit down as a council and make that priority list so that if money is available, we know exactly where we want to spend it. Thanks.
Councilor Garitano.
Yeah, my comments, a lot of them will resonate with, and if I could just ask, somebody's got their microphone on in here, if you could mute it, because I'm hearing an echo when I speak. So I will not repeat what Councilmember Gross already said. I do believe, and we normally do, a planning process, a strategic plan, and we are due for one. So that is something that I think will address the concerns that Councilmember Gross said. And if we're not planning on doing that, we should do that. So with regards to the amendment that Councilmember Remy made in committee, there's a difference between this budget versus our operating budget. The capital improvements are investments into the community. Now, obviously, we rely on revenues for that. But capital improvements can vary from year to year. There are years where we spend more money, and there are years where we spend less. In fact, the past year, we spent more because projects queued up. So I do see an opportunity where it'd be great if we can put some seed money into this. I don't know what flexibility there is. I'm going to have to rely to the financial expert to tell us that. And I'll ask the interim city administrator if there's any opportunity for any seed money that we could squeeze out of it right now. But I do feel it's important that we revisit it at least at mid-year, or when we can know how the year is going from a revenue perspective. If numbers start looking good the first 3 months, maybe then we need to then make a decision at that point where we can allocate additional funds, because I do believe that the effort will start to get some true traction once we give it some seed money. So my question for the interim city administrator is there any seed money at this point? I'm looking at it and I just don't know that I could tell the answer. I'd rather ask you.
Mr. Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Garitano, in looking at the capital improvements sales tax summary, which happens to be page 43 of the document, identifies revenues and the expenditures. The primary source of revenues is that 1/2 cent capital improvement sales tax, which runs about $2.2 million per year. The other significant source of revenue to cover capital improvements is in federal and state grants. The issue that we have in the projected 2021 budget is that those grants are projected to be about $650,000. That is down from $1.9 million that we received in 2020. So that's a significant drop in revenues. And then to have a balanced budget, we had to determine what projects could be covered in terms of park development, roadway improvements, bridge reconstruction, etc. There are no other sources of revenue at this time other than those two primary ones that I just mentioned. So to earmark something, again, there's just those two line items.
So what I'm seeing,
95%.
So what I'm seeing here, if I read this correctly, is that there's only $10,200 that we could allocate and still have a balanced budget.
That's a correct statement, sir.
Councilmember Clark. I'm sorry, Councilmember Edens, have I called on you?
No, finish it up.
Well, my apology. I missed you. I think at least one back. I erroneously marked you off the list, and it just occurred to me. So if you would be so kind, Councilmember Clark, and let Councilmember Edens go next. Please go ahead, Councilmember Edens.
Yes, but better late than never. I wanted to address a couple of the questions about projects and priorities and what that would look like. I am a member of both Admin and Public Works and the Watershed Erosion Task Force. There are different degrees of projects that we will be undertaking as a task force, some of which will take place over multiple years and can cost a lot of money, but there are also what Dr. Hammer has referred to as short-term solutions to prevent danger to infrastructure or magnitude of loss of land. And so what that would include is essentially taking a bulldozer and getting down into the creek bed and moving point loads or essentially barges of gravel that have been created. So if I had money tomorrow, I know that we have projects ready to go that could be bid out. Now, I think the process will look less traditional than a normal scope of work, simply because what you would define as the scope may be different than when you get out into the creek bed, because you may have had 3 rain events, which then shaped it, changed the bed of the creek. So I'm not sure how specific it actually gets in comparison to other committees, but I know we could do work essentially tomorrow, or we have ideas ready to go if we had any sort of money at all to work with. So my question is, if balancing the budget is really important to the council today, is there some sort of a verbal commitment from this council that if we brought you projects with a cost to it, that you would spend money on these projects if we identified it as critical? Because if not, and we won't get the money up front in an allocation, what that means is we just wasted staff time, which I don't want to do, because that requires project bidding, scope of work, and I wouldn't want to be a staff member that spends a lot of time doing that without a guarantee of any money spent at all. Granted, it could be used for another year. So that's my fear. So if you don't allocate up front, then I hope that when we come to you as a committee with something more specific, that you'll really support us. We did look at maybe moving one project. I didn't seriously motion for it because Councilmember Bertolino wasn't there to defend the project. Initially, I thought about doing a 1-for-1 swap and delaying the Birch Forest turnaround. I did not make that motion. That was the only thing I could find that just affected a small number of people, whereas erosion affects hundreds of people and could help Ward 4, Ward 5, Ward 2, Ward 3. There just has to be a commitment from the council that if we come to you with projects, which we will, that are short-term solutions that have a cost to it, that we have a little bit of money to work with, because it's bad and it is critical. So everything cannot just wait another year. I've been down in the creeks and I've seen it, and I will take you and I will meet with you if you'd like me to show you. But Anniversary Park, The Highlands, these are some areas, another one in Ward 4 that could be addressed immediately with essentially a bulldozer.
Councilmember Clark.
Yeah, you know,
I'm sorry. Councilors, we have about 3 minutes left before we need to take a break and start the meeting. So if it's been said once, if you could just keep that in mind. Otherwise, we can try to get this approved or not before we adjourn. Great. If we can't, we'll come back. But go ahead, Councilmember Clark.
well, I totally, I agree with so much that's been said, and I know that there's issues. You know, I'm on the Watershed Erosion Task Force, so I know these issues are there, and I know there's a lot of projects. The only problem I have with it is that we don't know where that money is going to come from specifically, and when we're asked what projects there are, we're just talking about, well, there's a project here and a project there. And if we had like a plan, like Larry was talking about, that for all of the things that we're bringing to council, I think we would be able to see it in front of us and see this list of things and specifics instead of we have a lot of things we need to work on.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
So I don't want to, I'm going to keep this short, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to kind of hit a couple other points that people did. I think a balanced budget is important. I ran on the fact that I would be a good steward of taxpayer dollars. Having a balanced budget does that. I am also on the Watershed Task Erosion Committee. I was involved in the Ward 5 erosion issues way before the task force began. I know how important it is. I totally support the work that the task force is doing. We have already spent dollars on the task force for consultants. We just recently in committee passed money to bring another consultant forward. If you're going to give me a specific project, you know, then maybe I could support this. I don't hear a specific project, even as being a member on the task force. And as far as taking money away from the Birch Forest turnaround, these residents have been waiting for this for over 3 years. It has gotten bounced out of the budget twice. Was promised mid-year, that didn't happen. There are a lot of projects that are important to each ward. The Ward 5 residents in the Birch Forest and the individuals that live in villages of Brightleaf have been promised this for over 2 years. So if you're going to pull it from somewhere, please find somewhere else to pull it from. Thank you. Councilmember
Rambo.
Yeah, real quickly, I'll try to be respectful of the fact that we only have a couple minutes left. I try to live within my means, but these are needed repairs on city property. It's kind of a stitch in time approach. I see this as a discretionary fund, and we can fine tune, you know, the places that we apply these, you know, modest funds to keep us from having to spend a lot more money later. If it were my own property, I'd get a loan to fix it. To echo what Councilmember Brost said, numbers speak to me as well. But a lot of times budgets are speaking Martian, and so I have to listen to experts like Councilmember Brost, who's a CPA, and assume that it's okay to dip into our discretionary funds for or our reserve funds for needed improvements. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Councilor Remy, I have you on the list. Anything new?
Question for Mr. Monich.
Go ahead.
So now that we've got our consultant coming in the next week and a half, or excuse me, 2 weeks, with $125,000 with the consultant, you have any concerns that we won't be able to use that money appropriately to attack some of the stopgap measures as mentioned by Dr. Hammer?
Well, for any project to receive grant funding or state or federal funding, we need a plan. Right. And what Dr. Hammer's prepared is not a plan. It's a snapshot in time of a problem that needs to be fixed. And then secondly, we do have an opportunity to do some interim steps to save us some time. And in my opinion, money down the road, because if we can correct some minor things now and stave off a major problem, that's saving money in the future. So I think we could very much appropriately use this money to get some of the issues that are plaguing our watersheds addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. I fully agree. Thank you.
Councilor Bartoni.
Thank you, but for the interest of like our residents, I can wait until afterwards if we want to start the regular.
You're actually the last speaker, so once you speak, I think we're going to vote, and then we'll take a break and have the main meeting. Go ahead.
So I agreed with a lot of what Larry said, except the balanced budget part. I think it is important also. The one thing that you never have to do is apologize for a balanced budget. And I think it's important that we continue to do that. You know, I mean, we can, I agree with the part where he said we've had a lot of momentum, and I'd like to maintain that momentum and actually increase it, but we do have to find some place to get this. You know, whether we get it from internet, I think we also need to keep in mind that we need to use this money for the benefit of the most residents and to figure out which projects are going to be not just the most crucial to the city, but are going to benefit the most people. So my final question on this, though, or maybe my first question really is, do we need to make a final decision on this today? Because we're just taking this to council for the regular session, and like, can it be debated further at that point?
So the motion that we'll be looking for this evening would be a motion to have that legislation prepared that would be presented to the council, I believe, at the next meeting. That could always be amended at that point if the council chose to do that.
So if, you know, Councilmember Remy didn't have like maybe the answer that everybody's looking for, he could come up with that answer maybe in a couple weeks.
He could.
Okay, because I mean, I think we need to maintain this balanced budget. I think it is important, and I think a lot of people have promised that to their residents and to their constituents. But I think we do need to just probably all of us take a little bit harder look at this and figure out a way to maintain the work that they've done.
Thank you. We do have one more speaker, Councilmember Dodwell.
Piggybacking on what Councilmember Bartoni just said, I would recommend that each of the council members go through the capital improvement areas to see whether or not there might be some funding sources there that they would be willing to push to another year that would allow us. But understand that what you're looking at there's some things that are tied to grants. So we can't really touch any of that funding because we have to spend those funds at specific times. But perhaps we could hold off on doing a Bellevue Farms activity until the following year so we can pull out 25 grand from that. I may be wrong, but I'd like to be able to discuss that either after our main meeting or at our next meeting.
Okay, so no one else on the list. We have a motion on the floor to amend the budget presented to add $125,000 to capital expenditure for the Watershed Erosion Task Force. An affirmative vote will be to add that. A no vote will be not to do it. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Gaetano.
Okay, well, I guess we're voting now, so.
We are.
I thought we were.
I'm gonna abstain.
Councilmember Flasher.
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino.
No.
Councilmember Dodwell.
No.
Councilmember Nyden.
No.
Councilmember Bartoni.
No at this time, but we'll find you the money.
Councilmember Bros.
Yes.
Councilmember Clark.
No.
Councilmember Edens.
Yes.
Councilmember Remy.
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer.
Yes.
Councilmember Galani.
Yeah.
Councilmember McCune. Councilmember Rambo. Councilmember McCutcheon.
Okay, the motion carries. So now we'll need to get into where we're going to take it from. And that will be when we come back, we need to recess. So without objection, we'll recess the work session and come back. We're also, just FYI, going to take up hopefully a motion to have some strategic planning done, which was suggested not only by Councilor Rose, but others, and I think that'd be a great idea. So without objection, we'll recess the work session for 3 minutes. We'll come back and start the main meeting of the council, and then we'll go back into the work session. Thank you. Motion carries, by the way. My apology.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
There is also,
Thanks for your email.
Sorry. Oh, both of you. Are you okay with your work? It's December 12th. That's the plan, and then the scent, and then the okay. And then your color.
A proud sport.
No, I didn't.
They are.
Okay.
She did so well.
Kim. I didn't. We asked the department chair.
No, and I think
We asked the department chair. Gotcha. So, I didn't hand do anything.
the kids will play soccer real quick.
Yep.
And it's like, turn on the.
Yep.
Yep. $200,000.
No, he gets 120.
I just.
If that.
I heard that you, I heard you dropping that's 125 to 75. Yeah.
Yeah. We got it. Ken, we gotta go. We gotta go.
So Joe told you that.
Yeah. I'm good.
Well, he's saying, we're not going to do
That's fine. Okay, can we, Julian?
There's also 30,000.
For Monday, October 26, 2020. Ms. Eldridge, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Boland.
Here.
Councilmember Garitano.
Here.
Councilmember Flasher.
Here.
Councilmember Rowe. Councilmember Bertolino.
Here.
Councilmember Dodwell. Councilmember Nye.
Here.
Councilmember Bartoni.
Here.
Councilmember Bros.
Here.
Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Edens.
Here.
Councilmember Remy.
Here.
Councilmember Farmer.
Here.
Councilmember Galani.
Here.
Councilmember McCune.
Here.
Councilmember Rambo.
Here.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
Okay, thank you and welcome everyone, and welcome to those that are with us in council chambers this evening, as well as those who are joining us by Zoom. For everyone here who is comfortably able, if you would please stand with me to say the Pledge of Allegiance, I would appreciate it. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. Next is the approval of minutes from the council's October 12, 2020 work session and regular meeting. If there are any questions on the minutes, we can entertain those. Otherwise, I would ask for a motion to approve the minutes. Made by Councilmember McCune. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Flasher. All in favor, please say, I'm sorry, any discussion on the motion? See no discussion. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Moving next into public participation, I'm assuming we have speaker cards this evening. I want to mention just a few things about that. Public comment is a valuable component of our meeting. Anyone who wishes to speak must complete a speaker card and provide it to the city clerk, who is seated to your left of the podium. When your name is called, please approach the podium and state your name and ward. To ensure that all who wish to speak have the opportunity to do so, there is a 5-minute time limitation, and I will let you know when the time limit is reached. If you have any questions for us, please mention that during your remarks and identify the official you would like to respond. That official will make note of it, and at the conclusion of public participation, any official who chooses to respond will have 3 minutes to do so as to all questions directed to that official. The official may choose not to respond to your questions until after tonight's meeting, and we may also post any responses on the City Council page of our website. And finally, please be respectful to others in making your remarks. This means that interrupting others and using profane and abusive language are prohibited. And I want to thank everyone in advance for following these. And I also want to mention, just logistically, we have 2 opportunities to speak this evening. Same rules apply to both segments. The first is public participation about anything you'd like to speak about. And the second is a public hearing related to PZ 2021 and 22. So if you want to speak on that, the time for that would be in just a few moments at the public hearing for that matter. First speaker card for public participation, please.
The first speaker card is Mary Morton, wishing to comment on the Special Circumstances Overlay District.
Just need my name, Mary Morton.
And your ward.
Ward 2. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for listening to me almost every 2 weeks. So, oh, just like, is this right?
It's the iPad.
Okay. Where's the mic?
I think if you just grab the headphones and put them on the podium.
Oh, okay. This? I'm sure. Okay. 5 minutes start. Again, I'd like to thank everybody for listening to me every 2 weeks. I'm sure that hopefully with some good luck and some blessing here, it won't happen every 2 weeks. But I would like to kind of just focus my conversation here today on all the elected officials that are our council members. You are a governing body of this city. You have the power to vote yay or nay to things that affect people, permanently, if not, in a good way forever. So I'm going to start with just talking about the SCO, the overlay that I just refer to it as the overlay, and really had a very nice meeting. Ask a Planner, which is a couple weeks ago. Some of you were on. I'm not sure if everybody knows, and was not able really to have a chance to do any input the last couple of weeks, and kind of concerned about that. But had a nice conversation today with the planning department, and recognized that it's still kind of a work in progress. So since I've been doing this for 2 months and dug in pretty deep and got quite a few other things that I found out, the reason why you all are being overloaded with this subject is because we have not really had any updates. And as a resident lives literally less than a block from the boundary line, I have not been told really anything for the last 4 years. So forgive me if this is a lot on this issue. It's obvious we've got some other really important issues in the community that are as important. So I really like to focus on what I think is a very helpful part of that letter that you all received, council members received on August 3rd. And it's a letter from John Young to Joe Vunich. And it really talks about not only going with the PRD, which is, level 1, I call it, then adding the site assessment that's required, which is looking like somewhere in the overlay, which would be level 2. And then because of the EPA and how they've, I can't really describe in my own personal opinion, but it's how they've kind of described these sites, particular Strucker Forest and the Callahan. It appears that our attorney has advised that we actually implement some higher standards for those as well. And since I live next to both of them, I would say that that would be amazing, and what an opportunity for our council and for the whole city to make an area become, really safe for actually people who are living there. And that won't end, that will continue. So I personally don't think there's anything wrong with, I don't think anybody would have an issue with that. And that we could really make this overlay quite significant and protective. And I'm sure that most people would agree, but I wanted to make that statement because I'm interested in that happening from now. And as we talked about in the meeting, for years and years to come, because not everybody will, stay, people move around and new people will come. So actually keep that in mind. And in your letter that you got on August 3rd, there is a copy of that John Young's letter that does kind of really very in detail describe what needs to happen. And then the Chesapeake document, which I'm hoping all of you have, that was pretty protective for all of us. And so in the journey of going through all of this, the Callahan sidewalk, I'm grateful we're getting a sidewalk. Clearly, I'd look forward to one on the other side of the road too, something that actually connects. And currently, that Callahan side will only connect to grass. So, but the most important thing for me was trying to understand the reasoning for the pretty significant environmental testing that was scheduled under the sidewalk, although it was motioned and voted down. I think it's interesting to kind of look into that. So that was an important piece for me as well. And I would like to know a little bit more, and it doesn't have to be conversation tonight, but I would like to know more about how in the 4-year time with no conversation, we got involved with the Superfund Site Task Force Remediation Program, which is a very specific program in and of itself. It requires whoever participates in it, which would be our municipality. The Callahan site was literally one of the first 7 out of 1,800 sites that has successfully, according to the EPA, been delisted. So it's involved in this program. First is testing, second is remediation. Third is, finding the forensic footpath or the companies that's chemicals perhaps are in there. Number 4 is finding investors and stakeholders. And number 5 is final development. So if people are wondering why people are concerned about that over there, this really speaks loudly of that. So that's, there's more information on that on the website. I can lead some folks to go to that if they're interested. And the other thing is obviously the recent kind of surprise was the 330-page Brownsfield Phase 1 final report on the Callahan site, which really, it's kind of astonishing considering that half the Callahan site has recently come up for auction, which is scheduled for tomorrow. So again, we are concerned. One last point, if I have time. It's a good one, very positive. Okay.
You're right at your 5. So what do you think?
Okay. In both the Chesapeake document, they use the word welfare often. In the one that our planning department put together with John Young, actually describes it even better, general welfare. I looked it up like I like to look up words. And I discovered that this is one of the basic formats and thoughts of their founding fathers writing the Constitution. And I would like to read this a little bit. And it was our overlay that had that more descriptive in there. It says the concern of the government for health, peace, morality, and safety of its citizens, providing for the welfare of the general public, is a basic goal of government. The preamble to the U.S. Constitution cites promotion of the general welfare as primary reason for the creation of the Constitution. So since it's in both documents, I'd like it to stay, of course, but I do think it's a positive way to express that our local governments are really, you have a great responsibility to keep your people protected and safe. So thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Next speaker card, please.
The next speaker card is Dr. Victoria Allen, wishing to comment on the overlay in Bliss Ellisville site.
Mary's so nice. I'm afraid I might not be quite as nice as she is. Victoria Allen, Ward 4. And we thought that maybe this was going to be a discussion about the SCODE, the Special Circumstances Overlay District, that I couldn't even utter the words and I knew nothing about a month ago. I know a lot now. We've uncovered a great deal. And we're really here to help you to get this right, because it's pretty obvious that you guys are overworked, you've got too much to do, and it's really simple. John Young put it together for us. And the thing that I want to go ahead and I want to talk about tonight, even though it appears that this isn't going to be at a vote tonight, But you know, is one of the elements that I thought was of utmost importance. And those of you that are professionals in the room will understand that, and I'm sure everyone else will too. And that is the credentialing process. And that is the process for that that if somebody thinks they're going to come in and develop this Superfund site, they have to adhere to the strictest standards, and they have to adhere to the strictest credentialing standards, and that has to do with the amount of education. The more education, the less years of experience, the less years of the less the education, the more years of experience. These people have to meet standards as far as their continuing education. They have to have no breaks in their work history. And that isn't in what you received initially. And that's really important. We can't have some half-baked individual doing this stuff. This is our lives, and if they think that they're going to put houses on this property, you're going to be asking people to live on this property. Would you buy a house? Would you spend $500,000 on a house on a Superfund site? Not one of you would. So we have to do everything to try to protect these people. So that is really for future reference for you to tuck away as to something that has to be in the SCODE and has to be spelled out very clearly. We have to have everything very clearly, and there's no reason. They also they recommend that the P&Z select this person. So there's no reason that we should leave the P&Z in the dark. This is how you do it. This is the standards by which we allow somebody to work on these sites. And then there's a whole lot more that goes into this as a site assessment about the phase 1 and the phase 2. You know, we've come across some documents that are pretty interesting, which speak to the fact that we as people in the area have heard absolutely not one word in the last 4 years about these properties being delisted. Although there was a lot of talk before the 4 years, and there were letters written and there were public announcements about, you know, what we were going to get. And I went through the entire 300 pages, and what I really discovered, and it took me, because I've never seen anything like it before, but it took me about 3/4 of the way through to figure out that this is nothing more than a workbook. It's the workbook that the guys pick up on the way out the door, and this is what they check the box, they fill in the blank, they copy and paste some stuff. So most of it is nothing. And it says it all in the first sentence. But of course, you know, I couldn't just go through 2 pages and say, oh, okay, I understand. I had to go through every single page. It was not fun. But what this targeted brownfield assessment boils down to, and this is a year old now, it was October 28, 2019. It says that based on the results of this phase 1 targeted brownfield assessment related to the property does not warrant further investigation prior to residential development. So this is what the EPA has determined. And they determined incorrectly. We know they determined it incorrectly, but they're saying, too bad, you lose. Get out of here. No money, no nothing. And so we are left in this neighborhood unprotected of Superfund sites. We've got the Callahan property that's going on the auction block tomorrow.
Miss Allen, how much more do you have?
Not much.
Well, how much more exactly?
30 seconds.
Okay, thank you.
So we have a piece of Superfund property that's going on the auction block, and guess who's going to buy it? And we have got to protect the people in this neighborhood. And additionally, you think that the runoff is just down Cox Creek and the erosion is just Cox Creek. What the erosion task force has not considered is what happens underneath the ground. And if you look at what I sent each of you, which is Dr. DeFeur's assessment, you'll find that he speaks a great deal about the water issue in this area. You need to read it.
Thank you. Next speaker card, please.
I don't have any more speaker cards, but I'll defer to Julian if he has anyone wishing to speak on
Any
Zoom.
hands up, Julian?
We do have at least one hand raised. I know there's several others, so if you wouldn't mind giving everybody else a moment, if they would like to speak, to either raise their hand on Zoom or post in the chat box and we will call on you.
Why don't we go ahead with the person who has the hand raised, and everyone who heard that can proceed accordingly. So who do we have next?
I am moving her over right now. It is Jean Vedvig. And she is moved over.
Ms. Vedvig, please go ahead. State your name and your ward.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Vedvig. Please state your name and your ward.
Oh, sorry about that, but my computer just totally shut down and now you're back. Okay. Jean Vedvig, 16709 Clayton Road, Wildwood, Missouri, Ward 4. Really quickly, I just have a question about the deer count. I wanted to ask my council member, wait a minute, it's asking me, I wanted to ask my council member Dodwell, if she could get me some information or get back to me even today. I get it, the deer situation is a difficult one, and I personally support safe, responsible hunting of deer. Wildwood has adopted some time ago a very good hunting ordinance, and the hunting ordinance was adopted with input from people who live in Wildwood who are hunters and non-hunters. So the managed hunts in the past, Babbler, Rockwood, and Greensfelder seem to have been successful part of deer management in the past. And here's my concern. I know you'll all come up with a good solution on everything, but I want it clarified. Will the section in our ordinance requiring a 3-acre minimum continue to be supported? Or will there be an effort to allow people to combine lots and allow hunting where there will be multiple homes on a 3-acre area? This has been a constant in the subdivision I live in. There's a person that goes around every year trying to get people to combine their lots. And we don't want that. Our houses are too close together. And there are other subdivisions that homes are even closer together. And I know that they say there are sharpshooters and everything will be just fine. Well, I think that we have enough large parcels of land in this city to allow for responsible hunting in those areas. So I would request that, I know this is a difficult financial time, that you'll all work on that, but that you continue to maintain the 3-acre requirement and not allow people to bundle these smaller lots in order to hunt in the backyards. And that includes the bow. We have had a dead deer in the backyard with a bow, or well, it was actually in my neighbor's yard. And it was pretty frightening to the neighbors and all of the kids around to have a deer with a arrow in it in their backyard. So I would just, that was my comment. And I do have a question, but it's for the public hearing. So I guess I have to wait till then. But thank you for allowing me to ask about that requirement.
Okay, and Ms. Vedvig, if it would be more convenient for you, the public hearing is next. I don't think there'd be any objection if you want to make your comment relative to the PZ planning and zoning item.
Sure. My only comment about it's really hard. You have to excuse me for the digress for a minute. It's hard to look the document up on the city's website and be able to participate in the Zoom meeting also. So I was trying to look and see what the plans were for the developer for the outlot on the either you call it the Ackerley or the Payne development. So there was supposed to be a commercial type development, and I just wanted to know if that was going to still be included in there or not. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll ask our Director of Planning to comment on that.
Okay. And I'll note that I was under 5 minutes.
Yes, you were. Thank you, Ms. Bedvig.
You're welcome.
You actually got 2 5 minutes there, and you did well with both of those. So thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. Any other speakers, Julian? Raise hand. Okay. Thanks to all of you who came here, and also you, Ms. Bedvig, for speaking during public participation and the public hearing. Before we get to the public hearing, real quickly, I just want to mention some good news. Dawn Kaiser, who you know is on our team in our accounting department here at City Hall, she just received a very prestigious award from the Government Finance Officers Association, and it was the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award. And to get that award, she had to prepare budget documents that were proficient in 4 categories: policy as a policy document, a financial plan, an operations guide, and a communications device. What they didn't include, but if they did, they would have given her a double award, were her performance during all of our discussions, even over the weekend, about our budget that we're now discussing tonight, when she had to deal with the mayor. So we thank her. I've thanked her for that already, but I want to thank her again. And we just want to recognize Dawn. So without objection, let's give a round of applause for Dawn and the award. Mr. Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for Dawn Kaiser. She is well deserved of this award. I would like to point out one other thing. This is the 15th year in a row that Dawn Kaiser has gotten this award, from the years 2006 through 2020. 15 straight years for this very prestigious award. So kudos to Dawn Kaiser.
All right. Dawn, would you like to say something?
Can't unmute. I just want to thank all members of staff and city council for their contributions and assistance in the preparation of the budget. Without everyone's help, we just would never achieve the goal of getting the award. So I just want to thank everyone here and all the members of staff that have put their hard work into putting the budget together.
Thank you.
And I appreciate all your kind words. Thank you.
Budgets are always tough choices. All right. Moving next into public hearings, we have one item, PZ 2021 and 22-15. Ms. Eldridge, would you please read that?
Request for modifications of the street network map of the town center plan as set forth for a property that totals 50.65 acres of area, which is located on the west side of State Route 109, north of Manchester Road. The requested modifications to the street network map reflect the petitioner's intent to alter the location and design components of the proposed Main Street extension through the subject site, along with other changes to the network of internal roadways. Accompanying the aforementioned town center plan street network map modifications is a request for a change in zoning from the C8 plan commercial district and R6A 3,000 square foot residence district with the planned environment unit PEU to the amended C8 planned commercial district, town center workplace district, and R3 10,000 square foot residence district, town center neighborhood edge district, and neighborhood general district with the planned residential development overlay district, PRD, for the same tract of land, again being located on the west side of State Route 109, north of Manchester Road, located numbers 23V110022 and 23W320013. Street addresses being 2431 State Route 109 and 17225 Manchester Road. Proposed use a total of 140 detached single-family dwellings on individual lots with common ground, required public space areas, and a minimum of 1 commercial outlet to State Route 109. This revised advertisement supplements PZ 918 at Wildwood, which had been posted for public hearing on July 16th, 2018 by the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Thank you. And before we get to public speakers on this item, Joe, is there any background you'd like to provide the council? And in doing that, I have two things, if I could ask of you. Number one is if you could please let what, if any, action you would be looking for from the council this evening. And number two, I know that we did receive a few comments from residents by email and through our online submittal form. And I think it would help the council, and I know it would help me, if you could let us know whether the residents who provided those comments live near this proposed development or elsewhere, and how far away they may live from it. And I'd ask the same thing for any speakers this evening, if they would be so kind as to do that. I think that helps assess the comments. So Joe, with that, do you have anything you would like to mention for the council?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, and I'll try to be brief. Certainly, I cannot cover 5 years of history associated with a single development and not have us be here till the wee hours of the morning. Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, the Planning and Zoning Commission has provided for your consideration tonight its final letter of recommendation. That letter of recommendation reflects their consideration of the request over the last 5-year period. There have been many changes to the request over that period of time, but tonight the letter of recommendation is supporting 132 detached single-family dwellings on individual lots. Those 132 detached single-family dwellings on individual lots would be located on the 50-acre tract that is located in what the Planning and Zoning Commission described as the southwest quadrant of the intersection of State Route 100 and State Route 109. Over the course of the last year, beginning in January 2020, the Planning and Zoning Commission moved to a different direction relative to this site, one not so much new urbanism, but one that reflects low impact development techniques. Those low impact development techniques are reflected in stormwater management, tree preservation, and generally speaking, the layout of the lots and the offering of public space. Collectively, the design has many changes from the neighborhood design standards and the architectural guidelines of the town center plan, as well as the street network map. But collectively, again, the Planning and Zoning Commission felt that as development transition from the core area of town center to west of State Route 109, a different approach was necessary. Larger lots, greater lot widths, less development improvements, so as, again, the character of the property could be retained. The Planning and Zoning Commission also, in this particular instance, worked very hard to ensure that the outlot for commercial purposes was retained. That outlot does front onto State Route 109 and is south of the extension of Main Street from the current roundabout that was constructed recently on Route 109. I would note, though, that the outlot cannot be pre-graded nor any tree removal allowed until such time that there is actually an approved site development plan for a project to proceed. The intent is to not have it pre-graded, sit empty as a field, and have become more of an eyesore than an asset to the city of Wildwood. Finally, the department would note that there are many components of this relating to public space. There is a large central park that is being planned with facilities, and those facilities include playgrounds and pavilions. There is a network of shared use or multiple use trails that are being planned, as well as a scenic overlook. And there is intended to be a network of internal pedestrian improvements that will ultimately connect both to Manchester Road and State Route 109. The process since January of 2020 has been arduous. The development team, that being Payne Family Homes, Stock and Associates, and Mike Doster, their legal representative, have spent a great deal of time trying to work through all the requests of the Planning and Zoning Commission to arrive to this point. Finally, I would note that they are all in attendance and would like to speak in this matter during the public hearing. But with that, Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, I'll conclude this brief presentation. I thank you for your attention, and as always, the department would be glad to answer any questions regarding the letter of recommendation from the city's Planning and Zoning Commission. Thank you.
Hey, Joe, and then my two questions. First of all, what, if anything, would you be looking for potentially from the council this evening?
Mr. Mayor, if there is a favorable discussion, the department would respectfully request authorization to prepare the legislation to accommodate the rezoning of the property and the application of the overlay district. And I have gone briefly through the comments that were received by the city relative to this particular project. Several of the residents do reside in town center. Some do not reside very close to town center, and some are far removed. I can develop a map and show the distances from the site of the comments we received, but I wouldn't be able to have that to you until probably Tuesday or Wednesday.
That's okay. Just off the cuff, and I'm not looking for concrete science here, but did any of them look as if they were adjoining or in the immediate vicinity of the development?
No, sir. None were in the adjoin or in the immediate vicinity. As you know, though, during the process, Mrs. Tishanen, who shares a common boundary with the southern edge of the property, did attend some of our meetings and has commented through the course of the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and we do have, as Joe mentioned, a representative, Mr. Doster and Mr. Stock are both with us this evening. Mr. Doster, did you want to say anything this evening for Mr. Stock?
Thank you, Mayor Boland and members of the council. My name is Mike Doster. I'm on the development team for Payne Family Homes with respect to the proposed development called The Reserve. I'll keep my comments brief. I could not hear Mr. Vunich, but I assume he did his usual good job of summarizing the proposal. It's been a long journey on this particular proposal. We actually started the process with respect to the reserve plan, the one that is before you this evening, back in the middle of 2017. But prior to that, there was a plan called the Ackerley Plan, which was substantially compliant with the town center plan, but it was clear that it was not a plan that was desired by most people and by members of the community. So we went back to the drawing board and developed the reserve plan. And it was apparent that the reserve plan had to be something different and unique west of 109. It needed to be a transitional development that had a transition of design and function away from new urbanism, which is what was originally contemplated. Despite the fact that it's been a long journey and there have been many steps in the journey, every step involved the identification and attempted resolution of various issues and concerns, and we believe that we have done that with this plan. Originally, there were 2 commercial outlots and 158 single-family detached homes on individual lots proposed in the reserve plan, and through various changes in the reserve plan, we now have 1 commercial outlot of reduced size and a maximum of 132 single-family detached homes on individual lots. The street design is quite different. It's not a grid design. It is a winding street through the development. And in our opinion, and I think the opinion of many, the street is more appropriate, more suitable to a neighborhood. Lot sizes have been increased. The lot sizes along Main Street have a minimum of 70 feet on the front. And throughout the rest of the lots in the development, there is an average of 65 feet in width. With respect to trees, green space, and landscaping, I'll just cover some highlights here. Through various changes in the reserve plan, all the grand trees will be preserved. With plantings plus preservation of woodlands, the total preservation plus woodlands, or excuse me, plus plantings is 37.5%. And as you probably know, your code requires 30%. So we have exceeded that standard. There's also included in the development a village green common area that we believe is one of the largest, if not the largest, emitting of its type in any residential development in the town center. We've also emphasized that there will be planting along 109 in Manchester, and it will be given priority in terms of the scheduling of the development, subject to grading. One of the unique features of the conditions that are before you with respect to this proposal is that there's a requirement that there be 5 phases of grading. I have not seen this before in any other development, but it was requested here, and through the work of the development team, we've been able to come up with a 5-phase grading plan. What does that mean? It means that there are 5 areas within the development, and they will be developed or graded in order. We also have a unique product line for this development that's not like what Payne offered east of 109. It's called the Lifestyle Series, and these homes are very attractive. When we were before the Planning Commission the last time, there were 4 elevations, I believe, that were not desired, and so through a motion, those elevations were eliminated. There is some clarification, I think, that needs to be done with respect to that language that's in the condition in the proposal that's before you. It wasn't the entire, at least in our view, it wasn't the entire Montego set of elevations that was to be eliminated, but only those elevations that have what we call faux balconies or faux fronts that were objectionable. And I have copies of those elevations with me tonight. I don't know whether we can display them on the screen. I had asked about that, but here we go. Thank you very much, whoever did that. Thank you. So these are 2 elevations in what are called the Reserve Montego elevations, elevation D, and then there's another set that's called Reserve Montego 2 elevations, elevation D. And we believe that those were the 4 elevations that were objected to when we were last before the Planning Commission. And we believe that the condition should be written to address these 4, but not the entire set of Montego elevations. There are a total, I think, of about 18 plans within the Montego set of elevations. And the Montego elevations are really the most popular among our customers. I believe there was also some language that Mr. Stock talked to Mr. Vunich about earlier today with respect to stormwater and right-of-way. And I believe there was an understanding reached, but that language probably has not been revised as yet. And Mr. Vunich may be able to speak to that. But with that, I'll conclude my brief remarks, and I'm happy to answer any questions. If there are questions I can't answer, Mr. Stock is here, and so is Mr. Bill Allen of Payne Family Homes.
Thank you, Mr. Doster. And I guess I would just suggest that if the council does make a motion, if anyone makes a motion relative to moving forward with this project, that it be done subject to, between now and the time legislation is presented to the council at a later date, resolution of the Montego issue and the stormwater issue, so that that's not waiting around in ambiguity after that point. So I have 3 council members that have their requested to speak on this. Before we get to them, Councilmember Kuhn, do you have any questions for the developer, or you just want to speak generally on the project? Okay, so I'm sorry. Okay. Councilmember Edens, I have you on the list. Did you have questions for the developer, or did you just want to speak generally on the project?
Generally, although I would still like to be put back in line to generally speak, but I do have one question that I couldn't tell from the map is, what is the setback from the curb of the street to the sidewalk? In other words, I'm wondering how many feet there would ever be for a street tree.
What is the setback from the curb of the street to the sidewalk?
In our right of way?
We'll defer to Mr. Stock on that, Mayor.
Yeah. Mr. Stock, do you have an answer to that? Approximately 12 feet, he says.
Oh, okay. So
Any other questions?
just put me back in line.
Okay, we'll put you back. Councilmember Garitano, you were next. Did you have a question for the developer, or did you want to speak on the project generally?
Speak on the project in general.
Okay, we'll come back to you. Councilmember Remy, you just raised your hand. Did you have a question for the developer?
Nope. Ready to make a motion when we're ready for that.
I'm sorry?
I will make the motion when we get to the, after that, we're done with the comments.
Okay, okay. So I'll put you on the list. All right, any, Councilmember McCutcheon, question for the developer? Okay, I'll add you to the list. Any questions for the developer? Otherwise, we're gonna, the way we do this, so he will be seated, then we'll have public comment, and then we will, I'll recognize council members who are on the list that want to speak, but we need to hear from the public first. So any questions for the developer before we move to public comment? All right, seeing none, we can always ask later if we need to. Thank you, Mr. Doster and Mr. Stock, appreciate it.
Thank you, Mayor. Council members.
You're welcome. Speaker cards?
I just have one speaker card so far from John Gunther,
Okay.
wishing to comment on this item.
Mr. Gunther, when you're coming forward, you were here, I believe, when I went through the few things that we follow on these public hearings. So if you need me to repeat that, I can, but I'm assuming you heard those. So.
Thank you all. It's a privilege to speak to you tonight. My name is John Gunther from Ward 1. I would like to address the City Council tonight regarding the reserve at Wildwood, a 50.65 acre site west of Highway 109 and north of Manchester Road. I spoke at the previous two planning and zoning meetings on the same subject. The petitioner's presentation given after I spoke reinforced and confirmed all the issues I tried to raise. I continue to be extremely concerned. Can I have the first slide? This is a typical cul-de-sac subdivision without connecting street patterns. This does not adhere to the traditional neighborhood planning principles established with the town center plan. The development is a major departure from new urbanism. In fact, it is the exact opposite of what was called for by the City of Wildwood for the town center. Public space consists of detention basins, leftover ground alongside roads and Bonham Creek itself, instead of meaningful places created for gathering and focal points of the neighborhood. It's 100% front garage entries with 2 to 3 car garages on full display. Approximately 20 to 40% of the sidewalk experience is walking on somebody's driveway. The development seeks the density of the town center, but it doesn't adhere to the requirements. Windsor Crest to the north in the Wildwood Town Center, north of 100 and west of 109, followed the requirements with residences fronting onto streets and build two lines with uninterrupted sidewalks and porches as a social interface with the public realm. Second slide, please. The city should be consistent in applying its requirements. The second slide is showing a what if for a traditional neighborhood plan based upon the Windsor Crest model to the north. And in it, it shows connecting street patterns, meaningful public spaces, a walkable neighborhood, front porches, and attempts to preserve the perimeter of the vegetation by placing the development within the tree stand delineation, thus buffering Bottom Creek. The proposed development, however, is graded from property line to property line. 2 sets of 6-foot-high tiered retaining walls, 500 feet long and 320 feet long, are required at the property lines to make the grades work. Of the 22.64 acres of woodlands as defined by the development team on this site, only 3.7 acres will be retained. This on a 50.65 acre site. The site will be drastically regraded. 26 feet of soil is cut away to create one of the detention basins. One common ground sits in a man-made detention basin 22 feet below the surrounding yards. Yes, 2 stories deep. Another common ground sits in a man-made basin 12 feet below the street, which sits on fill. So much for public space. Eastern residential lots with their rear yards facing Highway 109 are proposed to be created by adding a plateau of soil 20 feet above the existing grades, after all the woodlands are removed there. The absorption of rainfall into the soils and the lessening of energy of rainfalls by the tree leaf canopies will be lost. This is creating a man-made desert, damaging and altering the ecology of the site. The buffer to Bonham Creek is encroached by 2 detention basins on the banks of the creek, not the 100-foot buffer called for, not to mention the city's consultant to the Watershed Erosion Task Force recommending possibly 200 to 250-foot buffer along the creek. What will the impact be to the headwaters of Bonham Creek? As a member of the Wildwood Erosion Task Force, we are attempting to identify solutions to extensive erosion issues in our creeks. With this proposed development, are we creating the source for new erosion problems downstream? Are we going to be paying for our remediation efforts for years to come? Access to the site at 109 was illustrated in renderings at a previous P&Z meeting, and it shows as if the topography is flat, not the approximate 30-foot drop down to the creek, which will have to be spanned to get into the development. As city council members, I would urge you to walk the site and the creek in preparation for both closure. In conclusion, the city was founded on sound planning principles, both to preserve the environment and ecology of this area, as well as to seek responsible development within the town center with new urbanism and traditional town planning, as well as other residential areas throughout Wildwood. It was not saying no development, rather, it was asking for a responsible development. As you review this proposed development, please know that this is precedent-setting decision and vote ahead of you all. This is on your watch as members of the city council. Will you stand up for responsible development? Will you stand up for town center requirements and principles? Will you stand up for preserving the delicate ecology of this site?
Mr. Gunther, how much more do you have there? How much more do you have?
2 sentences.
Okay.
Thank you. Will you stand up for preserving the delicate ecology of this site at the headwaters of Bonham Creek? Will you stand up and be proactive regarding the impact downstream to this creek and the citizens' properties along the way? I, for one, certainly hope you will stand up for the city, its requirements and principles as you consider this proposed development. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker card, please. With the indulgence of the few counselors I have that are on the list, Mr. Doster, I have a question for you, if you could please come back. So at the Planning and Zoning Commission, we had extensive discussion, largely attributable to Mr. Gunther's comments, I believe, in some respect, relative to the effect on Bonham Creek and the erosion and all of those things. Now, I guess I have a 2-part question. My first question is, I'm assuming, based on what we were presented at Planning and Zoning, at the Planning and Zoning Commission, that your client, the developer, had engineers that looked at the effect of this development on that creek. Is that correct or not?
That is correct.
Then my second question is, how can you assure, if this were to go forward, how can you assure the council and our residents and me that there will not be ill effects on Bonham Creek as a result of this development?
Mr. Stock may be able to answer this in more detail than I can, but I'll tell you what I recall from our representations and our discussions as team members. There are strict regulations that apply, MSD's regulations and your own regulations that apply. And we have to comply with those regulations. When it comes to stormwater, we cannot let more stormwater leave the property at a higher rate than what leaves the property now. And the analysis so far, and again, complete engineering is not done until we get the site plan, but the analysis done so far shows that actually we'll be reducing the runoff with this development, not increasing it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Stocks, is there anything you want to add to that answer?
Mr. Mayor, I believe that Mr. Doster accurately represented the stormwater management. So there's many aspects to the stormwater management, but ultimately what we look at is the pre-developed runoff from the site and its existing conditions. And then we look at it as a post-developed condition for a series of storms, anywhere from as small as a 2-year storm up to a 100-year storm. And we provide those best management practices or the E&P on the site in order to reduce the amount of runoff and quantity by attaining it, and also the quality of the water through the amended soils, the bioretention basins that we have, all in a matter of reducing those post-developed runoff rates to be below the pre-developed, and also control the velocities of the stormwater to below the velocities that exist today.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And thanks for coming back to the microphone, both of you, or Mr. Doster. First on the list, Councilmember McCune.
Just outside of the questions, the public comment that the emails that were sent in, are those read into the record? How does that work for the people that wrote in?
Attorney Young, can you respond to that?
Those are received by the city council, distributed to you, but no, they are not read into any record.
I think
there is no record.
Okay, so like public comment, it's kind of put into the discussion, you know, when they participate here.
I actually, now that I think about it, there was one mayor's report passed. I indicated we would not be, anyone who submits a written request, we will accept that and distribute it to the council. But if someone wants to speak to an issue, they would need to do that in person.
Okay. They asked that question, so I didn't know that answer. So that was one of my questions. So I just want to comment, there's a lot here. I think there's a lot of new council here too. So this has been going on for quite some time, and it's not that I'm against this development. I want to say that up front, but I do think that Mr. Gunther hit it right on the nail, is that we need to be responsible in this development. So I guess I question the council is, why has this been postponed for 2 years? And we have a new design, but was the watershed issues part of the postponements over the last 2 years? That's my first question. Who can answer that?
Joe, I don't think they were. I think the postponements related to getting larger lot sizes and not having such a largely condensed development and protecting the trees and so forth. But Joe, can you respond to her question?
Councilmember McCune, there were a number of items that led to the 2-year process. I would argue that there wasn't necessarily delays or postponements. It was more so things were identified by either the Department of Planning, the Planning and Zoning Commission, and it just took time for the development team to address them. But it was not just solely a delay relating to stormwater management.
Okay, yeah, I was just wondering if that was a new thing that was just recently brought up, but I think that Mr. Gunther really described it well. And some of the questions I had is that Bonham Creek is a concern, and he is on the watershed task force, and how the grade is going to work. I think that is one concern. So if we're going to move forward with anything tonight, I think that maybe we as a council walk the site, try to learn a little bit more from Mr. Gunther's questions. This is really going to change what that area looks like, and it does not conform to the town center plan. So for that reason, and for what his presentation was, which I've never spoke with him up to this point, so I appreciate you presenting the visual. It really makes sense. So, and the next question I have is the traffic concerns. That's a lot of homes for that circle, and it's already congested when normal traffic is going through there, especially during school and accessing the different businesses and people stopping and being confused with the roundabouts. So for those reasons, I just would like to learn a little bit more, address some concerns that were brought up tonight before I can actually vote on this or try to support something that's responsible. So thank you for your time, and looking forward to seeing what else other people have to say.
Councilmember Edens.
Okay, I apologize. My mouse froze, and that was very frustrating. I couldn't unmute myself. I'll start with the one good comment I have before I list my grievances. I think it's nice when trails, overlooks, and parks with playgrounds are added and incorporated into any plan. My concerns are as follows. I do not support making Main Street a residential street instead of an arterial street. I am concerned that the setback from the creeks is not long enough. I don't support the petitioner's plan to use different signage or lights, or request rather. I noted in the document that it was mentioned that the roundabout was not in the plan, and a couple of trees that had been identified were not in the plan. I have concerns about an escrow for half of a roundabout when it's likely that the roundabout will be built several years down the road, and therefore inflation would not have been taken into account. It would be the cost today. So the city will actually probably end up paying more than half, although we certainly want to have some money in escrow for that. Commissioner Helfrey brought up a good point. She was concerned about the total in escrow for the retention maintenance that the HOA would receive. I am concerned about when the deadline for spending starts on that. I can't remember what the percent capacity was that had to be filled in the neighborhood. I think that Hawthorne Street should be extended. I don't support it staying as a sub street. I can understand that if you're a resident that lives on that street, but I think what happens is that we've had good plans for street extensions, and then some residents that live there are understandably frustrated, but it does affect the traffic flow and the overall plan of the city. So I would like to see that extended. And then looking at the actual plans, you know, we've been concerned about garages. Certainly Commissioner Helfrey was. Well, if you look at the Bristol plan, it's mostly garage. Ashton is a bit odd. Denmark, Geneva have recessed porches, so the garage is out farther. That's odd. Meridian, same thing. And the one thing that has not been addressed is if there is current work in the creek that needs to be done before any development happens of any kind, that a developer should be responsible for. We've talked about what it means to slow the rate and to do minimal damage, but we've never addressed what work needs to be done tomorrow in the creek, because it's only going to get worse. And I don't understand the statement that this would reduce runoff because you're increasing impermeable surface, unless it was at such a drastic slope it all immediately drained and wasn't absorbed down. I don't really buy that. I read from the packet that the buyer retention was close to the banks of the creek. I mean, when you think about things normally draining, the longer the distance is, it also helps slows the rate. The statement that that Payne made, that people are selecting for front garages, that may be true, but I think what we've seen in Windsor Crest is that those houses sell, and there's something neat that other areas aren't doing. So people will buy those floor plans. You know, there were some good comments. They were towards the end of the packet. Former Commissioner Gragnani, former Commissioner Archesky, Councilmember Rambo. I really want to echo what they said. I completely agree. And those of you that aren't familiar with Mr. Gunther on the Erosion Task Force, he's a very valued member, and he is an architect. So that's why he was able to produce such a quality plan and put it on the screen. So the other issue, right, is the huge difference between the planning and zoning recommended density and T-cut. And I don't know how we reconcile that. I think the department's made a really good effort. Both of my commissioners on T-cut and planning and zoning voted against this project, so I do want to state that. The only thing that I can think of is that in planning the design, that the density varies throughout the design. In other words, that it's centralized and then spreads out as you get closer to that lot acre, 3 acre minimum that borders it. And as you get closer to the main the main roads. I don't know if I'm sure that's been looked at before, but we might want to look at that again. So in short, I know that was a lot. I don't have a reason to support this.
Councilor Garritano.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, good. So I have been poring over information on this site here. It was quite interesting. And I've got comments here. I've got some comments that I think are good and some comments where I do have some questions. So it's quite an interesting history, this site. Anybody can learn the history of it by going to Google and just looking up Slavic tract, and you'll see news stories. So this was the site that prior to Wildwood Incorporation, St. Louis County had defined it to be a mega commercial area. And it was the idea of basically what you see like in today where Chesterfield Mall is. There's that kind of loop road that goes around Chesterfield. Well, Pond Grover Loop Road was supposed to loop around this, and there was supposed to be shopping here. So it was interesting. And I think it was around 2007, 2008, and Mr. Vunich could keep me honest here. There was the DESCO proposal, was a Target shopping center on that site. And the Target shopping center, actually, I believe Mr. Vunich will correct me if I'm wrong, but was approved. However, the vision for that Target shopping center fell apart over, I think, a disagreement over financial incentives that Target wished to get for that site. And it's interesting because when you read the Slavic tract history, in 2013, or actually from 2010 to 2013, the Town Center Update team was doing their decade review, just like we're doing that right now. And I found that there were some folks, and even some former council members, even a former mayor, that really advocated to de-intensify the commercial. They did not want this to be as intense. And so the vision of it being a big commercial shopping area no longer was there. So it was interesting to see this proposal come forward. So I guess, let me call out some of the things I did find, but I don't see Joe here. So is it possible to put something on the projector here? I think this is interesting what we have here.
Julian.
Can you oh, it's not. Okay.
Can you just describe it?
Yeah.
Well, if you want
to put it still in here, I think that's good. Actually, take both of these because it was interesting. So, you know, in Town Center, we hear a lot because there's been a majority of the development that's going on in Town Center. So I'm very interested in hearing what folks think about. And the original proposal for this site was the Ackerley, which, just so you know, I think this site allows about 181 homes on it. That is what is allowed. So the Ackerley proposal is I think 160 homes. And as you can see, very grid network of streets, house next to house. I think if you count the number of houses on the east side, 30 homes straight, up and down. So that was the proposal. I was not a fan of it when I saw it. We've heard from our residents, they want larger lots and less density. So the other one, Julian, that is the one that I believe we're looking at now. So they brought it down from 160 to 132 homes. So I do hear when people say this is not Town Center. That is correct. There are not enough homes in it. But our residents want fewer homes. So I think the trend in this is moving in the right direction. So I think some other observations that I have here is that I'm glad to see that the minimum lot size increased from the original proposal. The original proposal had home lot sizes of about 5,000 square feet to 7,500 square feet. The new proposal, I believe my calculations are correct, and Joe, I'll ask you, the smallest lot size is 9,400 square feet. That's 0.21 acres. So it actually makes it one of the largest lot size subdivisions in the town center, because most of our lots are about in the newer developments. And remember, town center, it's about 0.10 in Grover Crossing, Canberry's 0.07 acres. These are all acres. Main Street Crossing about 1.3 acres. And these are 0.21. So I am thrilled that we are increasing lot sizes. So, Mr. Vunich, I'll pause here for a second. Have I said anything erroneous, or do I need to be corrected on any of this?
Councilmember Garitano, you are correct. Over the course of the last 5 years, the number of lots has been reduced significantly. And along with the reduction in lots, the size of the remaining lots have increased to the point where we now have an average lot width of 65 feet, except along Main Street where it is 70 feet. And we have an average depth of approximately 145 feet. Equating that out, we've increased the lot sizes on this site by reducing the number.
Okay, so thanks for that information. So this, I think, is good information. I mean, I was really happy to see this. I guess where my questions are and where I need to understand better is when it comes to the tree preservation, the number of grand trees that are being preserved on this site. The number, I think that's out there seems just too few, and I would like some more assurance and understanding how that those grand trees can be preserved, or the trees on the site. So that's my first point, and then the second item has already been mentioned about Bonham Creek. So I'll leave it at that, but I do appreciate that the lots are larger, less density on that.
So we'll tackle the trees real quickly. Councilor Garitano, I know that was an issue that was very much in my mind at P&Z. My recollection, Joe, is this correct? The total grand tree population on the site is each of those trees is being preserved. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. All the grand trees as defined by the petitioner's landscape architect are to be preserved.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Councilor Garitano?
Can you repeat that? Sorry. Can you repeat that? Sorry, I didn't hear it too good.
Go ahead, Joe.
Based upon the tree stand delineation completed by the petitioner's landscape architect, all grand trees are to be preserved on the site.
I feel like the number is just too few, but I guess what are they using? Okay, and is the determine what is a grand tree? Isn't it the diameter?
Yes, the diameter at breast height and the species of tree combined define what is a grand type.
So is the diameter different per type, per species, or is it the same across all species?
It's different based on hardwoods, softwoods, or what I would consider more the evergreens, and then flowering types.
My recollection, Councilor Garitano, is that the Grand Tree Protection Ordinance measurements in that ordinance rather are larger for the hardwoods, the walnuts, the oaks, and so forth, and smaller for the softwoods, pines, for example. But I would expect there probably aren't many, if any, softwoods on this site, frankly. I think they're probably all hardwoods, I would imagine.
All right, well, and then the other comments about the creek have already been stated. So I'll pause for now and may come back with another question or so.
Dodwell?
Might I interrupt for just a minute because
You're on the list. You're up.
Okay. Okay. I've walked this entire site from front to back, north to south, east to west. And the trees that are on this site, most of this is scrap. I'm trying to think of what the designation is. Weed woods is what I would call it on the section that runs along 109. There's swamp down in that area from my recollection. And so I think the plan that they proposed has been a positive plan. I'm glad that they have reduced the number of homes on the site. I'm also very pleased that we are having some type of a transition that allows us to move from dense town center into medium town center, similar to what we have just across the, if I'm pointing the right way, just across the street down here on Manchester. We have less dense homes. And so from that perspective, I'm going to support this because I think they've done their due diligence. And I also think that the Planning and Zoning Commission will continue to watch as they work through this. And I believe, Mr. Vunish, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that based on past performance, we will have a more diligent review of activities on this particular site as it goes under construction. I was very pleased to see the phased approach rather than just breaking everything, and then we may wait 2 or 3 years for those homes to be purchased and developed. So I'm very pleased to see that the Planning and Zoning Commission has caused the developer, and the developer has agreed with being willing to be a little bit more pragmatic on how they make this development occur in a planned fashion versus just a strafe and go kind of fashion. So I'm going to support this.
Are you making a motion to that effect, or
I will
you
make
just?
a motion to that effect.
Okay. Want to be clear because you're saying support a few times there. So, okay.
Sorry.
So, sorry. So we have a motion to have legislation prepared. Now, to be clear, and Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, if the motion passes, when this comes back to the council, there are several more phases before the council, or at least a few, before this would be finally and completely implemented. Is that not correct? And if it is correct, could you please explain what those processes would be, stages?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd be glad to. The introduction of the bill and its final passage is actually about a third of the way through the process. Thereafter, there is the site development plan review process by the Planning and Zoning Commission, which acts as the preliminary development, the preliminary plat. There's also required architectural review by the Architectural Review Board. And then after those 2 steps are complete, we actually then move into the improvement plans, which are the construction drawings that detail down to every square foot what's going to happen on the site. And then finally, we move into the record plat. The record plat can be done in different phases as well, and that could carry on for several months or a year or more. So the development itself will be with the City Council and the City Planning and Zoning Commission for a while.
So I just wanted to put this in perspective, particularly for new council, the new council members, relative to if this motion passes, what would occur. It's a lot of steps. So we have a motion on the floor to have the legislation prepared. Is there a second to that motion? Seconded by Councilmember Bertolino. So discussion is on the motion. Councilmember Remy, you are next.
I amend the motion.
Depends on what your amendment is. Let's hear it.
I'd like to postpone preparation of the legislation until we can have our paid consultant, David Hammer, provide written and at council considerations of some of the concerns of the erosion task force. I had a nice conversation today with Bunich and other leaders, and I agree with everything that the previous council members had said. I'd like to postpone preparation for that reason. Until Dr. Hammer can provide a written assessment of potential erosion impact.
Okay, so we have a motion to postpone until Dr. Hammer can provide us an opinion. Is there a second to that motion? Seconded by Councilmember McCune. So the discussion now is on the motion to postpone until Dr. Hammer can provide us an opinion on erosion. And if this passes, just to be clear, I'm going to have a number of questions for Dr. Hammer to include and to address. Discussion on the motion to postpone.
I just want to comment on what Councilmember Remy said.
Okay, so I got to take it in order.
On what I just seconded.
I'm going to put you on the list. You're on the list. So
Okay,
discussions on the motion. I've already have you on the list, but I have others ahead of you.
No, that was something separate, but on this, I just have a question in the procedure.
Councilor McCune, I have to call on them next, even though your comment relates to something different. So I have to ask them as a courtesy whether they want to speak on the motion to postpone since they were ahead of you on the list. If you'll just bear with me about 30 seconds, you'll probably be up. Councilmember Rambo, you were next. Did you want to speak on the motion to postpone or on the main motion?
I have a number of comments on the main motion, but I will just say in terms of the amendment or amended motion,
It's actually just a motion
proposed amendment. I would like to add verification of the landscape plan, tree preservation plan, et cetera, because I walked the site as well. I saw a dramatically different site than some others, and I have real questions about the actual validity of that, the tree preservation plan, the grand trees, and those sorts of things. So,
would there be any objection to that being part of the motion to postpone? Councilmember Rooney?
Not at all.
Any member of the council, since the motion to postpone has been made, it's in the possession of the council. Does any member of the council have any issue with that being part of the motion to postpone? Okay, seeing none, that's what it will be. Okay, thank you. And then next on the list was you, Councilmember McCune. So we just had to do things in order for people to be fair.
I was just questioning the second as far as clarifying what we were seconding.
Okay, the second is to the motion to postpone, which is to get an opinion from Dr. Hammer relative to the erosion issue on Bottom Creek, and then with the consent of the council, Councilmember Rambo's information. And timeline, Councilmember Remy?
Up to 4 weeks.
Okay, so no more than 30 days. Okay, any other discussion on the motion to postpone? Councilmember Remy?
Yeah, just for Mr. Vunich, we had a nice dialogue about this afternoon, and you've discussed this with Dr. Hammer previously. You feel that in the next 4 weeks or 30 days, we'll be able to get a written comment by him and either have him come to the meeting and just provide his expertise in this area?
I believe we can have the
Okay, thank you. And if there's no objection from the council, I would like to get copies of provided to the council along with his report of the engineers that any engineer that the developer has retained, whether it's Mr. Stock or otherwise, so that the council have the full panoply of opinions in addition to Mr. Hammer's. Would there be any objection to that? Okay, having all the information so we can compare and contrast if there is anything to compare and contrast. Okay, so that is, oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Edens.
Yes, thank you so much. I just want to make sure I understand. Councilmember Remy, was a cost estimate of any work to be done in the creek bed included in the motion? If not, I would like to add it, because right now it's an assessment. And what if he's going to turn around and say, you know what, the health of the creek right now is an issue before we add any homes, and here's how I would fix it. I'm just going to send it back for a cost estimate, and that's going to waste a couple of weeks. Whereas if it's included up front, I know what I would want the developer to do.
I think without objection, he can provide his opinion to the extent he knows about what the cost might be, but that assumes he's going to come up with something. I'm assuming for the purpose of the motion, we're looking for objective criteria, not a foregone conclusion as to what he might say at this point.
Sure. It's just, I didn't want to waste time if there was something found, but I'm going to support this just because I'd like to learn more information about the health of the creek in this area. But as I've stated before, I've got a lot of other concerns and it doesn't go all the way to address this. So I've already aired those grievances, but I think if you're interested in learning more about this creek and what any sort of development will do to it, you need to vote for this.
Thank you. Seeing anyone, I'm sorry, Councilmember Bertolino.
Yeah, my question is to Joe. Joe, if we approve this current motion, we've delayed the action for at least another 30 days or so. If we did not approve this amendment and we went ahead and voted to approve this and move the legislation, can't we do both? Can't we simultaneously move to the legislation and also have the assessment instead of having these sort of have to wait and then get an assessment and then wait again?
Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Bertolino, yes, you could authorize legislation to be prepared. It could be introduced in 2 weeks, but there is no guarantee then if the information isn't ready for you from Dr. Hammer, Mr. Stock, the petitioner's engineer, that you would move to final passage the following 2 weeks, which would approximately be the 23rd of November.
But I think in addition to what Joe just said, I'm not speaking for or against, but if the motion to postpone fails and then you go back, the council goes back to the main motion and passes Councilmember Dodwell's motion, to the extent the council doesn't feel that adequate information has been provided by the city's engineer or anyone else, you could always postpone the bill at that point too. So there's a procedural, in addition to what Joe's saying, I just want to mention procedurally, you always have the motion to postpone available until it's finally done. Just FYI. You okay, Councilmember Bertolino? Okay, Councilmember Dodwell?
Yeah.
Good? Okay. So Councilmember Garitano.
Yeah, I just want to say my support. It's very important that we get some answers on the creek and the tree item. So I'd like to get that information before making any decision.
Okay.
That's my comment.
Thank you. Councilmember Clark?
Yeah, I have a question about, in this report that you're asking for us to get for the engineer report to include the developer's engineer report. If that does not include a mapped out area of the trees, if we can get that mapped out area of the trees also so that we can know exactly what we're looking for when we go out and walk the area.
I interpreted Councilmember Rambo's request that would be included.
Okay.
Okay, seeing no further discussion, this is on the motion to postpone for 30 days for the reasons indicated. And I hope you got all of those in the minutes. So it will not be just a report from Dr. Hammer, will be that plus other engineers plus the tree issue and vegetation issue that Councilmember Rambo mentioned. Right? Okay. All right. Motion, please call the roll. Motion to postpone.
Councilmember Fletcher,
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino,
No.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Nyan,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes.
Councilmember Gross,
No.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Remy,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Councilmember McHugh,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
No.
Councilmember Garitano.
Yes.
Okay, the motion to postpone passes. All right, thank you. And thanks to everyone who came and spoke on this evening. Moving into our legislation. First bill is 2569, and it is for second reading. It concerns all wards. Is there a motion for the second reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Dodwell, seconded by Councilmember McCutcheon. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Get a postponement on this and
Yes.
not pass it tonight?
You can do that, but it needs to be read first before you can postpone it.
Okay, thank you.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Joe, do you have anything you want to mention relative to the bill?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for recognizing me. As you know, the delay that has been caused of late was to allow John Young, our city attorney, to do some additional study and analysis of the regulations. That information was provided to the Department of Planning at the beginning of last week, a very busy week for the Department of Planning as well as many others here at City Hall. Mr. Young and I have not had a chance to go over the changes that he has proposed to the original regulations, and we are still receiving input from individuals, our residents, on it as well. So the department would respectfully request, after the bill is read into record, that it be postponed. It can be as short a time as the next meeting or no longer than 4 weeks or 30 days.
Okay, I think a motion to postpone would be in order at this point. Does someone wish to make a motion to postpone? Councilmember Dodwell, second by Councilmember McCune. 2 weeks or 4 weeks? 2 weeks. Okay, so we have a motion to postpone for 2 weeks. Is there any discussion on the motion to postpone Bill 2569? Seeing no discussion, all in favor of the motion to postpone, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? Bill carries.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Sure. You don't need to turn that on.
Okay.
Used to that.
Used to that. For those of you who attended this evening, I want to make sure that you understand that in reviewing the bill that's here in place, it does require a great deal of investigatory work be done on a site, and it has to meet specific requirements. And I appreciate all of the information that you've provided to council, to P&Z, to the planning department for the details and the concerns that you have. I think we will, by passing this particular ordinance, its whole purpose was to be more cautious, more diligent, and more respectful of the concerns that our residents have about this area. I'm not looking to approve any development in this area unless a lot more happens anytime in the near future. So I fully support this kind of a ordinance so that we have the ability to more strictly regulate areas of concern within the city of Wildwood. But I just want to thank you for providing your feedback and your information to help get us more in line with where we need to be going. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving next to Bill 2576. It's before the council for final passage and it concerns Ward 8. Is there a motion for the second reading of the bill? We have a Councilmember Galani, second by Councilmember Garetano. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2576.
2576, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the mayor of the City of Wildwood, Missouri to execute an agreement with Utilitra for the installation and maintenance of a security camera system, second reading.
Okay, thank you. Rick, do you have anything further to mention relative to, I'm sorry, I think this is a Joe Benich item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr.
I
Mayor,
think I made
members,
that mistake earlier. Joe, do you have anything you want to mention relative to this item?
just a couple of comments very quickly, Mr. Mayor, and thank you. Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council, I want to extend my thanks to the St. Louis County Police Department Wildwood Precinct for their efforts in this regard. And I'd also like to recognize Councilmember McCune, who has provided critique of this particular proposal and others before it, which I think made it better. So thank you. And I am available for any questions or comments.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Joe? All right, seeing none, Eldridge, please call the roll for final.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Ryan,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes.
Councilmember Gross,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Remy,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Councilmember McKeon,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon, Councilmember Garitano,
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher.
Yes.
Okay, bill passes. Moving next to Bill 2577, it is the start of our first readings for the evening, and it concerns wards 5, 7, and 8. Is there a motion for the first reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Bertolino, seconded by Councilmember Galani. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2577.
Bill 2577, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, amending traffic schedule 5 through highways, roads, and streets adopted by section 390.010 Code of Ordinances of the City of Wildwood to include Taylor Road, Village Hills Parkway, and Old Fairway Drive, first reading.
Okay, thank you. Rick, do you have anything you'd like to mention relative to Bill 2577?
No, Mayor, I do not, but I'm available for any questions or comments from the council.
Rick?
I'm sorry, Mayor, I do not. I'm available for any questions or comments from the city council, however.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Rick. Go ahead. Okay, did you have anything you wanted to add, Rick? My apology.
I do not, sir.
Okay, thank you. That was probably user error on my part. Any questions for Rick relative to Bill 2577? All right, seeing none, it'll be on the agenda for the next council meeting. Moving next to Bill 2578, it is before the council also for first reading, and it concerns wards 7 and 8. Is there a motion for the first reading of the bill? We have a Councilmember Flasher, seconded by Councilmember Garitano. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2578.
Bill 2578, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, amending Chapter 390, Traffic Schedule 6, intersection stops adopted by Section 390.010 of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Wildwood by deleting intersection stop restrictions at the intersection of Old Fairway Drive with Nantucket Island Drive, first reading.
Okay, thank you. Any question or anything you want to mention, Rick, relative to Bill 2578?
I have nothing, Mayor, but again, I'm available for any questions or comments.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Rick or any comments on the bill? All right, seeing none, it will also be on the council's agenda for the next meeting. And moving next, finally, first readings to Bill 2579. It's before the council and it concerns Ward 6. Is there a motion for the first reading of the bill made by Councilmember Rambo? Is there a second? Made by Councilmember Brost. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2579.
Bill 2579, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, reapproving an adjustment of certain common boundary lines between 3 existing parcels of ground known as a tract of land, being all of lots 1, 2, and 3 of Winden Pine subdivision, which is located within the northeast quarter of Section 16, Township 45 North, Range 3 East, 5th Principal Meridian, City of Wildwood, St. Louis County, Missouri, and more specifically situated on the south side of Melrose Road, east of State Route 100, for the purposes of reconfiguring their common boundary lines for the purposes of defining their current use patterns, hereafter Winden Pine Boundary Adjustment Plat, with such being in accordance with the city's subdivision and development regulations, first reading.
Okay, thank you. Joe, do you have anything you'd like to mention relative to Bill 2579?
Just a couple of items, Mr. Mayor, with your permission. The first, Mr. Jacquin just shared his screen. And again, this is just a representation of the boundary adjustment plat. And The reason for the boundary adjustment plat is to address how the pasture areas are set up between the three properties. And finally, this is a reapproval, and the 60 days lapsed relative to the city council's previous action. And I'm available for any comments or questions. Thank you.
Okay. Any comments or questions for Joe? All right, seeing none, moving into resolutions. Resolution 2020-23 is before the council and concerns all wards. Is there a motion to adopt resolution 2020-23? We have a Councilmember Garitano, second by Councilmember Dodwell. Ms. Eldridge, please read the resolution.
Resolution 2020-23, a resolution of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the mayor to negotiate and execute a contract on behalf of the city engaging Reuben Brown LLP, doing business as Reuben Brown, for the provision of monthly financial review for certain agreed upon procedures.
Okay, thank you. So this is brought about by virtue of the fact that, as you know, Mr. Cross could not serve in the capacities of both city treasurer by our ordinance and there's a charter. Charter, thank you. City Attorney Young could not serve in the capacity as city treasurer and also as interim city administrator. So he has formally resigned his position as city treasurer for the interim while he is serving in the city administrator capacity. And during that time, Reuben Brown would fill the role. And so that's what this resolution does. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion to adopt resolution 2020-23, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Resolution passes. Under miscellaneous, Joe, we have a receipt and file relative to the Old State Road Shared Use Project.
Yes, and Mr. Jacquin is going to share his screen real quickly. And the Department of Planning would note that the Planning and Zoning Commission reviewed the concept plan for this particular city project. It would be adding a shared use path along the north side of Old State Road between existing subdivisions, and the Planning and Zoning Commission unanimously supported it. I would note that it is a conceptual approval and engineering plans will be developed if the grant is funded, and therefore the residents in the vicinity will be given ample opportunity to review the design and any potential impacts to their property. Mr. Brown and I are available for any comments or questions. And thank you, Julian.
Okay, thank you. Councilor McCune.
So first, thanks. I really am excited about this this process and given access to Old State. So I guess Rick or Joe, how confident are we in St. Louis County given the easement to the area on Waterfront Way to Old State? I know that they own that property. What's your guys' temperature on them?
Actually, that particular right-of-way area that is a paper street at this time is under the jurisdiction of the city of Wildwood. And so with the support of our neighbors in the vicinity of it, it's something that can be done without St. Louis County permission.
Okay, that was one of my main concerns. So we will have a public comment because I did have some residents reach out from the agenda tonight on concerns because their backyards are right there as well. So we will have that opportunity for them.
Typically, that has been the practice of our Department of Public Works. They send out mailers, they hold an open house. They do a very good job at getting people to see the plans, comment on the plans, and take those comments to the engineering phase.
Okay, you answered it for the residents. Thank you.
Mr. Brown, did I say anything wrong there?
Joe, that was correct. And in fact, it's usually a requirement of the federal funding that we have those public meetings. So we would do that.
And my apologies, Mayor, for interrupting you.
All right, good to be right. Okay, any other questions on the receipt and file? Seeing none, I think submission of the proposed annual budget for 2021, we still actually need to address this in work session. So
This is for the SID, the crossing.
oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. We don't need to go back into work session for that. Right. So you have the budget that's proposed by the Community Improvement District. Joe, do you have anything you want to mention relative to that?
Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, this is an annual requirement under the rules of the Community Improvement District when it was established. The Community Improvement District Board of Directors went through a thorough analysis of all the revenues, expenditures, and approved this budget unanimously and is being submitted for receipt and filing and any comments.
Okay, so since it's under receipt and file, I'm assuming that that means there's no action by the council. We just take this on an informational basis, correct?
That's correct, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions for Joe on the said budget? Okay. And finally, approval of expenditures. Council's been provided with those. If you have any questions, I'm sure Mr. Cross or Don would be happy to address those. If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the expenditures as presented. Made by Councilmember Farmer. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Galani. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, all in favor of the motion to approve the expenditures, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions?
I'll abstain.
Okay, we have an abstention, which is Councilmember McHugh. Any other abstentions? That leads us to adjournment, and then we'll need to, why don't we take a couple of minute break, and then we'll come back into the work session. There's no objection. So motion to adjourn the main meeting of the council made by Councilmember Remy, seconded by Councilmember Gross. Non-debatable. All in favor of the motion to adjourn, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. So that's all for the main meeting. 4 minutes for break, and then we'll start back in the work session.
Yeah. I thought you could simply take a nap. Pardon? I don't disagree. No watershed. I want to go back to the budget and find places where we can say no. Okay. Yeah. No, I totally know that. The reason why I don't have it written. No, the reason but they found the money. Okay. Sure. Okay. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, Julian, I don't know where I can see because it's this big on the screen.
Yeah.
Hey, to do anything to that, like you can keep it online, so I don't know how to treat it, where I can find that.
Yep. View options. Pretty good. Because I'm the one running the Zoom and phone at the same time during the
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that means it's not quite a pin for battery.
It is when you're not running Zoom. Zoom is
Oh.
very draining. Yeah. Because there's a lot of different communication that happen. If you were just checking email or writing Word docs, it's okay. Yeah. Zoom. Sure is.
Yeah.
It's good that you still got half an hour.
Oh, yeah.
How do you want that?
So just go back to fit the window then? That didn't do anything. Didn't have that option. Under view options, They went backwards. They went, huh?
Okay, council members, we're going to resume the work session. So we had, when we left, the item that Councilmember Remy wanted to have put into the budget for capital expenditure of $125,000, and I think we did take a vote to, yes, the council took a vote and decided that that motion did pass. During break, our Director of Planning, Joe Vinich, came up with a potential solution relative to where those funds, where they might come. And actually, when he brought this up, it occurred to me that I think I mentioned this maybe in one of my mayor's reports or in an email, but if not, I just want to be clear. When we developed this budget, we being Steve Cross, Don, and I, relative to the proposed cuts, including the task force for watershed erosion, those were not done by me or Steve on a line item basis. The way that we didn't pick and choose among programs. I felt that the best way to come up with a balanced budget, knowing that we needed to make cuts, was to get input from each of the department heads because they are closer to it than certainly I am. And so the recommendations that you have before you came from our department heads. The only requirement that I asked them to pursue was an 11.5% reduction to allow us to reach a neutral place in our budget. So I don't know that I think I may have mentioned that, but I certainly didn't do it in those words. But I just want you and our residents to know that this was not a line item pick and choose by Steve or me or Dawn. These were recommendations to reach the cuts that we needed to make that were recommended by the department. So with that background in mind, Joe, as I mentioned, Vinich, our Director of Planning during break, thinks he may have a solution that would allow a place to take the funding for the motion that passed. So Joe, would you like to elaborate on that, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the opportunity. Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, in the capital improvement program for 2021, under Park and Trail Development, there is a line item for Bluffview Park improvements. It's shown as an amount of $200,000, which was the matching that the city was required to provide relative to the grant application of $550,000. The grant has not yet been awarded, and it is a competitive process. And so from the perspective of the department, the thought was that Bluffview Park, given what Gateway off-road cyclists were proposing in terms of trail development, it would be a golden opportunity to complement that with some additional improvements at that facility. Again, given that the grant hasn't been awarded, we could contact the Municipal Park Grant Commission, ask them to not review it, wait until next year, and be able to fund the Watershed Erosion Task Force, which again, based upon all of your comments tonight, is a priority and needs to be addressed sooner than later. Thank you.
Okay, so you have heard Joe's possible solution. Would someone like to make a motion, Councilmember Remy?
I would like to make the motion to remove that item from the 2021 budget. Move towards balancing our budget for 2021.
How about your motion be that we take 125,000 of that for your earlier motion?
Sure, if you don't want me to take it all, sure. I'll make that motion for 125. That's perfect.
There you go. Okay. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Dodwell. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no
So thank you. So real quick, Joe, I'm glad you found that. I might have you come over for dinner and you can look at my personal finances. Maybe you can find 200 grand real quick. But my question would be, if the municipal parks grant would get approved today, just for the sake of discussion, what is the time period that the city would have to move forward with the project? And the reason I ask that is, would we not ask them to look at it till next year if we have a couple years to, move forward?
The grant application is premised on a very preliminary concept plan for the improvements. So even if we were to be awarded the grant by the end of the year, which is the typical sequence, we would have to basically do design engineering of the plans, then bidding, and then ultimately selection of a contractor and approval by city council. So again, the likelihood of something happening in 2021 on this particular project is slim. We can obviously, if funds are available and we can, we'll reapply in the fall of 2021 and be ready to proceed forward in 2022 if the grant is awarded. And we've already done the heavy lifting doing the grant application. We'll just need to update the dates.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Councilor Edens?
Yes, thank you. Joe, I just had a question. It looks like it's page 46 of the 65, and it's number 40-480-59, future park development, i.e. a pedestrian bridge at the enclaves. So if that's just for planning it, wouldn't it make sense to delay the planning and then stay competitive in the grant?
Councilmember Edens, you caught me. I didn't update the description all the way. We actually have the engineered plans complete. We're ready to go to bid. And this is a nice project because McBride & Son Homes, the developer of the subdivision, has donated money toward the pedestrian bridge. So my apologies for not updating it, but we're pretty much ready to go with the bidding process.
Okay, well then never mind. Thank you for clarifying.
My pleasure.
Garitano.
Yeah, and I apologize, my Zoom cut out before. So if I heard correctly, the motion, it is for the Bluff View item. Okay, so this is capital money, which is good for capital funds, but obviously capital money cannot go to operating.
That is correct.
Something folks need to be aware of. All right, in this instance, I support that. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing that point up, Councilor Garitano. Yes, general revenue can pay for capital expenditures, but the reverse is not the case by law, so we cannot do that. Okay, seeing no further discussion, all in favor of the motion to move 125 as Joe Vinich has indicated to support the watershed erosion effort, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, that passes. Councilor Garitano, anything further from Admin Public Works as to additions?
Yes, there are two more items. So the next item pertains to the Public Works budget. Again, this is in the order of discussion. So during the review of the budget, there was a motion made for the hiring of a full-time staff member to the department with a total cost not to exceed $75,000. So that's Councilmember Edens could speak more to the item there that was raised. This one did have full favorable support with the exception of just one opposing vote. So I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Edens to speak regarding that item.
Yes, I think one of my concerns is that in general, we've lost two folks in the planning department, and we could use an additional person in Public Works. I know that we've also talked about what it would be to have a volunteer coordinator, somebody with a forestry service, somebody with maintenance. So one of my concerns is staff being overworked because there's more to get done with less people to go around. Stress level is affected, retention's affected, and quality in timely responses to our residents as well. So I'm concerned that we didn't give our departments the tools necessary to do their job. So I made this proposal with the hope that Director Brown would come back with more information about the type of person that we would look for. I would also support, if I needed to, adding a person at mid-year if we had money, and certainly if Director Vunich had a job job descriptions and somebody he wanted hired at mid-year as well. So I'm not married to the point that it has to happen today, but I do think that we need to plan for it in the future. I did notice, and there was a little bit of confusion on my part, that while we have 5-year goals for capital improvement, that we don't necessarily have it written down for administration. And we might want to consider, I know when Councilmember Brost was suggesting a meeting about goals to get on the same page, that we also do this with administration. So in other words, it could be something as simple as saying, you know, by 2022, we want to increase three people head count. And by 2024, we're looking for 1 more person, and you know, et cetera. So we need to start planning long-term for the increase of staff that we're going to need, and make sure that it gets budgeted and not the first thing that's cut. So if we can find a way to pay for it. And I know, like I said, Director Brown was going to give us more information. So I'd be interested to hear if it's going to be a part-time or just full-time position.
So this would be from general administrative, not capital. And just for clarification.
Right. What I was saying, yes. So I was saying while we have long-term capital goals, I couldn't find anything written out about increases in department for the admin.
And you mentioned Director of Vintage, but I think it would be Director, this is a Public Works, is that correct?
Yeah, it is a question. It is a question for Director Brown, but I was saying I would support staff hirings for Director Vintage in the future as well.
Okay.
Or if he would make the recommendation right now, I would support that.
And I'm gonna, fair enough, and I was gonna ask Rick a question as well. So Rick, my question to you is, I wasn't at the admin Public Works meeting. Is this something that originated with you and your department, or is this more of a top-down sort of, we think you need it? I mean, do you think you need it? I mean, I guess that's my question. And were you the originator of this because of that, or?
Well, it's a need that I had identified in previous years. Yes, Mayor, that is correct. The need for an arborist or forester or someone that has that background would be tremendously helpful. And it could be a person who works to support Public Works as well as Parks Department as well. And could help to keep our landscaping throughout the city looking good as well.
Okay. So Councilmember Eden, Councilmember Dodwell.
While I understand the need to perhaps add staff, I have an ethical issue with that when we are not allowing increases for our existing staff at this time. I think we should postpone any additional hiring during this next fiscal year, or at least until mid-year, so that we can evaluate what our income levels are and what the city administrator may think, along with the directors of all 3 groups, their needs are, because I just have a problem with not allowing staff to get a raise and then hiring additional personnel. That's just me.
So there is a 4% COLA built in? 1.3 COLA.
That's a 1.3, but there's no merit.
There is no merit, that is correct.
And I just.
Fair enough. Councilmember McCune. And there is no motion on the floor, by the way. Councilmember McCune.
That's fine. I just have a question for, I guess, Mr. Cross on the budget. I know that we've lost a position this year, Ms. Gaston's. Did we project that for next year for that fulfillment? Did we leave a placeholder in the budget for 2021 for that position? I had trouble reading through the budget. Do we earmark her salary that we did pay out, or what that range would be if we would hire somebody new?
I think that position remained open.
The 2021 budget.
So that those funds are still available to hire somebody in that specific position?
I don't think so.
Joe is saying, yeah. Joe
is, I'd have to ask Joe. Is he there?
Dawn?
Yes, the position is budgeted.
We can't hear you, Dawn. I'm sorry. Oh, I can't.
Okay, the position is budgeted.
Okay, position is budgeted.
Okay, so that was my first question, but I think Councilmember Dodwell, I appreciate what you're saying, but I also want to make sure that I understand staff needs, but I also understand residents' needs, and what we're here is for the residents. And if the staff can't provide answers and responses to the residents when they call, then we're doing a disservice to everybody that voted us to be here at this council. So I think that we always want things in a timely manner. We want to make sure that jobs get done. I think that they're overloaded. And I think that if you don't support your infrastructure, then everything is going to crumble. So I am in full support of this. How the funding happens, I guess I leave it to the masterminds of budgeting.
That would be you, actually.
The masterminds of
The
budgeting.
council will decide how the funding is made.
Sure, but it's just not one. But again, I just think that we have a need here that we need to fulfill, and I fully support it. And I'd love this discussion. And I'm not ready to make a motion because I think give everybody else some discussion points and see where we land. So.
Councilmember Rambo.
Yes, I'll make this real quickly. Thanks. Real quick. Thanks. I agree with Councilmember Dodwell and Councilmember McCune about being sensitive to the idea that we're not giving any raises, but we are giving a COLA. And I supported this position in committee. We didn't want to dictate the job spec, the job description, so we kind of left it open-ended. But it sounded to me as though Director Brown felt he could most use the services of someone in the arborist kind of realm, which made lots of sense to me. I think it can be cost savings because we spend a whole lot of money on contractors doing some work that we possibly could do in-house and just better manage the remaining contractors that we have on the ash tree replacement program, the treatment program, et cetera, et cetera. So I support this position. Thanks.
Councilmember Edens.
Yes, I would like to go ahead and put a motion on the floor for the recommendation of the committee. I understand Councilmember Dodwell's concerns. My thought was based on the input that I had heard from staff, which was what was more important. And the feedback that I got was staff being overworked. So that's why that was my first priority as opposed to raises, because a raise is great for your pocket, but it doesn't help your stress level and the amount of sleep that you get. And it doesn't help resident services. And as we talked to Director Brown, I will say one of the benefits that he said this position would have is it would free up our engineers to do more project management, and it would change how people would spend their time. And if we have someone like a forester or an arborist, we're actually going to save in the long run on our consulting fees. So it is more upfront, but I'm looking at built-in costs as well. Now, the bad news is I don't know how to pay for this. So I'm welcoming our directors and Steve's direction and the council's direction. I just feel that it's a good idea, and I'm open to negotiation, but I'd like to put the motion on the floor. And that was my reasoning.
So do you want to take it out of reserves or some other part of our general and administrative? Those are the two options.
Could I have some input from our directors and Steve Cross first before I clarify?
Sure. City Administrator Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, I would.
Oh, your microphone's off. There you go.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would defer to Mr. Brown, since this is a position that in his area. He did have a budget for a maintenance person, so I'd ask him where he might see those funds coming from.
Mr. Brown, how would you like to fund this?
Well, I don't know that I have other budget items that I can cut to come up with the funds. We did have some funds already in the budget prior to the cuts for a potential staff hire. So those essentially got removed. So I don't internally have other areas that I could cut that I could offer up right now.
So Councilmember Edens, I think the answer is it would be out of reserves. That's all that's left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if there's no other option, I don't want to drive a car with one wheel off of it. And so if I have to put the wheel back on and spend a little bit more to do that, then that's, oh, Dawn.
Can I make a suggestion? Possibly take a review of all the job descriptions in the Public Works Department, see how duties can maybe be redistributed more evenly, or try to get it lined out before we go into adding another long-term compounding expense to our budget. If we have like more clear guidelines on what was needed and what areas need more assistance, maybe we can redistribute some duties, make it a little easier for Rick's department.
Councilor Edens, would you be agreeable to that, or do you want your motion to stay on the floor?
I'd like to hear from Director Brown just a little bit more, because I thought from our discussion, he'd already thought about that, but if not, we can put a pin in it certainly and come back to it.
Without objection, Rick Brown, response to that?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mayor Boland. The thought with the position was kind of twofold. Right now, I have my street superintendent, Scott Hummel, and our civil engineer, Brendan Maher, are handling a lot of the complaints relative to tree removal, tree trimming, and landscaping. They really are not trained in that area whatsoever. We've always done the best we thought we could do. We've hired Davie Resource Group to help supplement our staff. That would be a savings that could be accounted for next year that would help. So I didn't mention that, but that is an area that we could cut. It would save a few bucks next year, but that was funded out of the capital improvement program, I believe. But the freeing up of their time, Scott Hummel and Brendan Maher, would allow Brendan to do other things, project management related, and so I could reallocate their time more effectively to do what they're best trained and best skilled to do, rather than landscaping, tree trimming, and tree removals and those sorts of things.
So Councilor Edens, I'm hearing Rick say that's not possible.
Come again.
I'm hearing Rick, in essence, saying that Dawn's suggestion is not workable. So do you want to continue with your motion?
I do.
Okay, and it would come out of reserves. Okay, correct?
I think it's going to have to, unless, as Rick mentioned, there could be a savings from our contractor budget, but it sounds like it's under capital improvement and wouldn't cross over.
Right, that's what I understood.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilmember Flasher. So this discussion on the motion, Councilor Garetano.
All right, now you should be able to hear me. So I do really appreciate the thought around looking at a way to help the Department of Public Works. I was the one dissenting vote there, and I'll explain why. I believe that we are now in the process where we are going to be looking at what the future is for a city administrator position is, and I think someone coming in and doing a thorough analysis of the positions, the descriptions that they do, and perhaps coming back with a recommendation as far as maybe some, just structuring as to how things are working. If they're not working, how can we improve them? Or is there a definite need with new staff adds? Because sometimes maybe it's just the process flow that's not right. So I do think there's an opportunity there. I was a bit troubled that the way this request came did not come in a budget proposal. It came to us more from a top down. And I think that it circumvents the process because we have other departments that may have needs and they did not get to voice whether they need a position. And so in essence, because we just became aware of this need in Department of Public Works, we're focusing attention on it to the point where we're even looking at using reserve funds. And I don't know if that's fair to the Department of Planning or any other department. It bothers me that we're sending a message to our staff that we're not able to do a merit increase. We are going to do a cost of living increase. We can't give you a raise, but we're going to go ahead and hire someone and we're going to pay for it out of the reserve. This is an ongoing commitment. I do believe we need a better description and a better confidence in knowing what this role is going to do. I think right now, well, I guess there is the mention of there's a role in the Department of Planning, but we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. So I don't know that that's fair to the Department of Planning, and we haven't heard from them. You know, I think there are other cities around us. We're all unique cities. We all manage our own budgets, but we also all benefit from the pool tax. So when we have other cities near us that are furloughing or instituting pay cuts, and we are hiring, I feel like we give them the case to say that the pool tax is not a fair formula. And that, I don't know if that's something I want to do. We've also cut some direct impact services. Remember a year ago, we had a conversation around the calendar and the recycling of that. And I feel like if we're going to start to look for funding, we should restore some of the cut services that impact our residents directly first. The concern about the staff overworked, I would like to drill into that better to understand it. Is it a performance issue? Is it maybe that it's sufficiently being done the work, or if there's a better way to do it? And then lastly, 2021, we've cut projects. So I'm concerned that we're maybe not taking into consideration that there will not be a Manchester Road Streetscape project. There will not be a Route 109 improvement project. There will not be a new Ward 5 park. So I wonder if our staff will have a change in the amount of work that they'll be doing in 2021 from 2020. I think these are all just things that we have to be very thoughtful about. And I wish that we just had more time to really digest and analyze this. So those are my thoughts.
Councilor Clark.
Thank you. I suppose I have to echo what Councilmember Garitano just said in a lot of ways. I just hearing this, I'm hearing that we came up with a need before we had a business case for that need. And then we'll find something for them, their job to do, an arborist or different things to do. Well, I'm sure those things need to be done, but you know, I come from manufacturing, and we went through a time where we had to go Lean Six Sigma from spending a lot of money to spending no money and still manufacture the same amount. And so I look at this as there's many places that we can improve. There always are places we can improve and tighten what we're doing and doing it in a more efficient way so that we have more robust, capable, and in control processes so we can decrease the waste in time and money and how we're doing things, and maybe increase our training and put the money into training the staff that's there so that the ones that don't know that much about the trees, they can get the training they need so they do know, instead of bringing in someone else. So, you know, I don't know, I haven't seen or heard the absolute need for another person, and maybe it's there, but I would tend to try to fix what we've got going on now first before we look elsewhere.
Councilor Bertolino.
I'd like to call the question.
Okay, the question has been called. Our city administrator did want to say one thing. Would you be okay with that, Councilmember Bertolino? Okay, so without objection, Steve, quickly, what did you want to mention relative to this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to point out to everyone, I have a very long list of to-dos, as you might imagine. One of the things that is very high on my list I have been asked to do is to perform a review of all positions throughout City Hall. So there may perhaps be a need within the Public Works Department. I don't know, but given the situation that we're in now, and We don't know how long this is going to be. This is an opportune time to look at all positions and see how we might be able to leverage any open positions that might serve in a couple roles. So this is, and several of you have mentioned to take a look at it. And what I wanted to let you know, it is already on my list, and it's high on my list to accomplish just that.
Okay.
And at some point in time, hopefully in the near future, I'll be able to report back to council where we are on that.
Okay. All right, thank you. Seeing no further speakers, the motion on the floor is to fund, what was the cost I heard? Was it 75,000?
Actually, if it's okay, sorry to interrupt, based on Mr. Cross's comments, I would be willing to withdraw the motion until after the review of all positions takes place.
Steve, do you have a ETA on, I know you said you're trying as soon as possible, but for Councilmember Eden's benefit and the rest of the council, when you think you might have that done?
That's a fairly large project, which would entail meeting with all department heads and reviewing all positions.
Rough estimate.
That's about at least maybe 5 weeks away.
Okay, so that's plenty. 5 weeks, Councilmember Eden's, which would, I mean, that would be, that was sooner than I expected. So, all right. So Councilor Eden's, with that, are you saying you want to withdraw your motion? Is that correct?
I will, with the understanding that I'm going to put a pin in it based on the findings, if that's amenable to the rest of the council.
So is there any objection, since the motion's been made and seconded, it's part of the, it's within the possession of the full council, so we would need to have unanimous consent that the motion be withdrawn. So is there anyone who objects to the motion being withdrawn? Seeing no objection, the motion is withdrawn. Thank you, Councilmember Edens. Councilmember Dodwell.
Here, just real quickly, I think we need to give the city administrator more than 5 weeks to complete that task. I would say by mid-January, we have an update, if that's even feasible, or is that still too soon? You've got holidays coming up. You've got staff time off coming up. Just year-end processes that need to be run through. So I'd rather you give yourself a little more time.
I don't see an exigent situation here, and so without objection from the council, and you in particular, Councilmember Edens, I think as long as we get at least a preliminary idea in the first quarter of 2021, I think that should be sufficient. Are you okay with that, Councilmember Edens?
Yes, and I think it was implied, but if during Administrator Cross's meetings with the departments and they determine that yes, in fact, they desperately need this position, that would be the great time to come back with a full job description and estimated costs.
Okay, sounds good.
In writing.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Garitano, do we have any other items from admin PW?
Okay, thank you. Yes, there is one more item from Admin Public Works, and this was raised during the administration portion of the budget. Councilmember Remy had made a motion to recommend an amendment providing funds for merit-based salary increases for city staff up to 3%, with individual increases to be at the discretion of the department heads. Councilmember Rambo seconded it, so there were the motion had passed. There was one no vote and one abstain.
Councilmember Remy, do you want to make that motion still?
I do.
Okay, and where would you like the funds to come from?
Sure. Can I just ask a question before I make the motion? So I would like to make the motion for merit-based salary increase up to 2%. I ran the numbers and we're looking at a little over $30,000. But my question for you is, can I make a motion, and this is a procedural question, can I make a motion tonight to add this to the budget, but at mid-year, that's where the funds will be allocated and then go retroactive to January 1, so that we don't have to dispense the funds, but we would at mid-year, then basically, because we'll know our financial situation there. Basically, I'm going to make the motion. Hopefully it'll pass, but we'll put it on hold.
You can do that. I'm going to restructure it just a little to get you from point A to point B. It wouldn't be an amendment to the budget because the budget is done now, not at mid-year. So your motion would be that the council examine the propriety of doing a 2%, you said, 2% raise?
Yes.
At mid-year, and that if the council does that at that juncture, it would be retroactive back to January 1. So, hold on. City attorney is shaking his head no.
The Missouri Constitution will prohibit us from making retroactive raises to anyone.
Okay. So the raise could be 4%.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, we can make that motion.
You can make the motion that the council consider at mid-year an increase to the budget of consider, not that it do it, because I think that's what you said, correct?
Yep.
Up to 4%.
Mayor,
Yes.
a 4% increase means a continual 4% increase, the way you've just worded it. So please be careful there.
It's up to,
Okay.
and I think that the council could decide to do something as a bonus or not just a salary increase. There are options that it could debate at that point. City Administrator Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I heard Councilmember Remy mention that he thought the dollar amount of this, at that time, the 3% raise would be maybe $37,000. I did want to point out that it is a little bit higher than that, because in addition to that, there are taxes that get paid, there are pension funds that get paid. So that number is closer to $50,000 when you lower it, when you put it all in, versus the 37. Just wanted to, and that was at the 3% number.
So thank you for that information. So the motion, again, procedurally, Councilmember Remy, would be that the council consider through whatever vehicles it chooses at the time to dispense up to 4% to the city members here at City Hall at mid-year budget review. And at that point, it can debate amounts and how it structures it and all sorts of things. Is that your motion?
That's my motion. Just to clarify for Mr. Kress, that would be, he's talking about 3%. My equivalent is 2%, so it should be less.
And we can debate that at the time.
Yep.
Not to know. All right. I think everybody gets the idea. I didn't mean to I was being a little facetious there. Is there a second to the motion? Second by Councilmember Rambo. Discussion on the motion. Councilmember McCune and then Councilmember Ryan.
Question. So on the percent raise, Councilmember Remy, is that for everybody across the board on the staff?
I'm going to rule that out of order. That's debated at the time you guys decide to debate it, which is at mid-year. That's not for tonight.
So what I'm asking is that he's asking for a merit for 2% for staff. Is that I just want to clarify. So you're saying all staff? It has
I think he said that it would be decided at that time, and the department heads would make a determination ultimately, but that's not for tonight. I mean, that's when this gets decided. It's not even right.
I'm not debating, I'm just asking for a clarification. So what I'm saying is that every staff member is eligible for a potential 2% increase merit.
And I'm saying every staff member would be eligible. What I'm saying is that remains to be seen. It depends on what the council does at mid-year if this motion passes.
Right, so I need to know if I'm voting, if that's what the motion is saying.
It's a possibility, but not foregone conclusion.
Okay.
Council member Maher.
I just had a clarification question. That is not inclusive of the 1.3%, right? This is separate from that, not to total too. That's what I thought.
Thank you for the clarification. Councilor McCune, did you understand what I was trying to get at there? What I'm trying to say is that, so if the motion passes, which is that the council debates and discusses what to do relative to whether to do, number one, at mid-year, and then how to dispense that and so forth. Those are all things that are going to be decided mid-year, not tonight. This is just that it gets it on the table for discussion. 6 months from now, potentially. Okay, any further discussion on the motion? Seeing no further discussion, Councilmember Remy?
I never actually got to talk about my motion.
Oh, I'm sorry, well, go ahead.
I just made it. So I just want to step back for 1 second and just first and foremost say that regardless of this vote, I'm pretty confident that our entire council knows and strongly believes that our city employees are second to none. These folks work harder than anyone you could imagine, and we run this city exceedingly lean. And so comparing them to Chesterfield or other locations is probably not appropriate, because when you look at our number of city employees per capita of our citizens, our employees work hard. And I appreciate their work, especially in a time of a pandemic when this is quite difficult, certainly to be able to provide for the residents at the level that our residents have become so accustomed to the wonderful work that our city employees have performed. And so it's my purview, and I know we're not voting tonight specifically, but I do believe it's incumbent upon us to demonstrate our support of our staff with giving them this up to merit-based increase went by the department heads when we get to that point. So I'm happy that Ms. Dodwell and Mr. Garetano also said in the preceding comments about the previous bill that they were supportive of merit-based, and I think this is a good thing that we should be doing for our employees.
And
Thank
so
you.
for clarification, this is not that it be done. The motion is that it be considered at 6 months. Councilor Garetano.
Yeah, and we do merit increases every year for our employees. I want to make sure it's known that that is part of the normal process during normal times. And I think right now, given everything that's going on, I think everyone's understanding that we should just wait until mid-year so we have a better sense of what the financial situation will be for our cities.
And not necessarily to be on the negative side of things, but in my conversations with other elected officials in other cities, we're actually fortunate up to this point because other cities have actually been furloughing employees to a fairly large degree. So City Administrator Steve Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's worth pointing out that when this budget was prepared and the direction that Finance Officer Don Kaiser and I were given was to make sure that this was a balanced budget, and we accomplished that. We accomplished that, and there were no increases at all in the budget, not a COLA or a merit increase. And it was the mayor who came to us and said, I want you to build in a 1.3% increase. And he sent Dawn and I back to the drawing board. We sharpened our pencils and we found a way to pay for that. But it was the mayor that said, we need to give them something. And so we were able to do 1.3%, and we found that. And I think that's worth noting.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no further discussion. All in favor of the motion as presented, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Same.
Councilor Edens abstains. Any other abstentions? Motion carries. And last, we had discussion earlier that was initiated by Councilor Brost relative to having a strategic session relative to our overall budget priorities. Would someone like to make a motion? And I've been giving this some thought that Mr. Cross and I'd be willing to work with him, develop maybe a plan of action relative to that and present it to the council for consideration in the next 30 days. Would someone like to make that motion? Maybe Councilor Brost, seconded by Councilor Garetano. Discussion on the motion. Councilmember McCutcheon.
I mean, we've done weekend work sessions where we've come up with a strategic plan, and it's time for us to do that. So is that
I think
your intent?
Dovetail both of those because you can't have a plan without money to pay for it. And so I think one begets the other. One thing I would just say, and I don't mean to oversimplify the process at all, because inevitably we all have things subjectively that we like more than others in the budget. And that's what makes the debate that happens in this room a good thing. So I don't mean to oversimplify it, but just to sort of cut to the chase, one of the things that I think would make that discussion go much more quickly and be much more productive is I would suggest the first thing the city administrator gets to all of you is a list on one page of the top 3 or 4, 5 items within each of our departments. And we have a grid of 1 to 5, and you just prioritize each one of those 1 to 5 and come up with your composite for the department, and your composite will then add the composites for each one. And that's a very quick and dirty way to determine what the council values. Now, we can have discussion about it, but I think that would gear the discussion and make it a much more efficient discussion. Councilmember Dodwell.
To dovetail on to what Deb has just said, would it be possible for us to put together a schedule at the first of the year that we take a Saturday or we take a day where we can sit down and we can talk strategically about where we want the city to be going? We've got our 5-year strategic plan that we need to be putting together. And I think that's a first step for all of us to begin discussing priorities. I want to take what you've already put together for the mayor's priorities and make sure that we add into that the priorities that the departments may have, the priorities that individual council members may have. And the only way I think that we can do that is to have a retreat, for lack of a better word, where we start digging down into some of that stuff a little bit more and make a determination.
We could do that. That's an option. And we don't have to decide this tonight.
No.
And I welcome your thoughts on it. We could do it that way. We could also do sequentially, devote some of the time at work session to the different topics. But I think the first thing, let's get a recommendation from our city administrator as to kind of how to go about it. Dovetailing with the strategic plan, which we are due. Thank you for raising that. And again, I think they go hand in hand. And then maybe some preliminary materials such as prioritizing 1 to 5 that go out to the council before we have it. And then we can discuss and show what those results are and have the discussion about it. Fair enough? Okay. And so we'll get that information within the next 30 days. Is that agreeable with you? All right, Larry, is that agreeable with you?
Yeah, I guess, the one thing that I just sort of just throw out there is what happened tonight is that we moved money away from something that was in the budget to an item that wasn't in the budget. And to me, that would imply that someone made the decision that the money for Bluffview was more important than erosion task force. That's what the budget said, that was more important. So yes, I think, the staff coming up with that list is important, but is that list going to have Bluffview over erosion? And then that's when we all kick in and provide our input, because I just didn't like seeing, I think erosion task force for 125,000 is better spent there than in Bluffview. And I love that part.
So you are correct. Those decisions, as I mentioned earlier, came from the department. But I don't think it's accurate to say that they thought Bluffview, for example, wasn't important, or this wasn't important and that's why it was cut or whatever. They had, and Steve discussed with them more than I did because they report to him, and that's the proper course. Why they chose what they chose and didn't choose what they chose. But to say that, for example, in the case of Joe, I'm gonna just speak on your behalf, Joe, for a second, that he didn't favor Bluffview and that's why he moved it over to here, or he didn't favor Watershed and that's why he moved it to kept Bluffview. He had other reasons for it, and I can tell you, I know from my discussions with him on Watershed or whatever, it was not that he didn't favor one or the other. We like it all, and I didn't like asking, for example, a cut of anything. I'd rather have us, expanding resident services if it's warranted, as in the case of Lauren's motion and so forth. This is just a snapshot, or at least I'm just speaking personally. I think this was just a snapshot that Joe and Rick and the others were following what I had asked them to do, of getting us a cut of 11.5% across the board so that we could, whether we agree with it or not, present a balanced budget. I wanted to present a balanced budget to the council, and then let all of you decide, as you should, how you want to go about it. But it's just a snapshot, and it's a snapshot that we are dealing with against a backdrop of certainly in my time with the city, nothing like I have ever seen before in terms of revenue reduction. And so I wouldn't necessarily, and I'll only speak for myself at this point. You are correct. Watershed erosion is on my top list. Lake Chesterfield, rural internet. This is for me a snapshot, and what I come back to the council with at mid-year, if things change, or certainly next year, once we're, hopefully through the pandemic and revenues are rising, will be a lot different than what you're seeing in this snapshot. But just to explain myself, and Joe, I hope I didn't overspeak for you, but I'm assuming just based on our discussions and knowing you, that's kind of the analysis you went through. Is that, you want to add anything to that? Or?
The reason Bluffview was retained is several months ago, the city council approved a resolution agreeing to the matching funds. So I didn't feel it was appropriate to take it out without first discussing it, which we did tonight. And I support what I said.
Okay. So Larry, did you give some additional information for you there?
I look forward to coming up with a list that really represents a consensus of the council on behalf of the residents that really targets our spending and that we're all on board. And I may be alone on saying I don't feel we need to budget or balance a budget, but you know what? Whatever the final decision is I'm on that team and we're going to go that way.
But budgets are always tough, as we all know, and certainly we have some big ticket items that we're going to have to decide how they're going to get paid for. And it may not be possible to pay for them by the city. Councilmember Clark.
Well, Councilmember Brose brought up something that it just keeps sticking in my head too, that do we have some sort of a priority development criteria to measure the importance of each issue, so that we say, this is a safety issue, we have to move it up on the list, whether that's what we really want or not? That's
a great question. You actually just caused me to think of something that I would submit to the council. We don't have to start it now, but after we get through the strategic process of what is important to this council in terms of where to spend the money, I think it would be helpful when we have resolutions and bills that come before us, just like we issue budgetary implications, that we list what strategic plan item it applies to, so that each one of these things can be captured with respect to, right out of the gate. When you're preparing for the meeting, you can look at it and you can say, yes, I remember that discussion. It is, priority number 1 of section 6 relating to planning and parks. So, okay, Councilmember Remy.
Councilmember Rambo and I think both had our hands raised.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Rambo. You're right.
No,
Thank you.
Okay. So
I think he was before you, though. But thank you for pointing that out. Long before you. Yes, you were. Because he's on my list and you're not. Councilmember Rambo.
But only the verbose can be brief in such situations. I think this may be a different kind of strategery with a separate list, but I wonder whether we should include a revenue strategy discussion as well. We do sales tax, we're talking about real estate tax, we're talking about grants, and it always happens organically and we do a great job with it, but it might be a good idea to formalize that while we're doing a strategy session.
I'm going to respectfully submit that on the one hand, I think that is something we probably should assess, but I would suggest that it be done separately.
Separate list, sure.
Because number 1, I think it's a little bit different than prioritizing.
I agree.
Spend, because that gets into how we get the income. So it's different. It's on the outtake rather than the intake. Number 2, I have a feeling, given the sensitivities of many of the things that discussion is inevitably going to entail, that it would make a mess of the strategic plan by commingling that debate, which is going to be extensive, with the expenditure debate.
I brought it up because Councilmember Brost had those two questions commingled in his very thoughtful email that he sent. I sent him some private comments because I didn't want to get, too big of a ball of wax, but I think we should have that discussion, even if it's separate.
If you'll give me the opportunity, I'd like to give some thought and maybe come up with a recommendation for the council to think about as to how it goes about that. Now, if you disagree with what I just said, and you want to do it?
No. I
would,
thought it probably should be separate, but while we're talking about strategy, we should have an overall strategy.
Agreed. Yeah. Councilmember Remy, thank you for your patience.
So 16 minutes ago, I was going to provide a novel idea, but the council member from Ward 1 beat me to it. So I was going to say the same thing, which is I like the idea of prioritizing with a scoring system. Just as a grant writer on study section, a lot of times there's priority scores for impact approach, a whole host of other areas. Mr. Vunich previously, when I was on TCUT, had a great prioritization scheme. And I do think that it would make sense for us to actually have the city departments do their own priorities, and then we as a council meet and do our own priorities, and then try to see if we can make sure that we're not incongruent with one another. And I think that might be a good way to do this. It's just bear with me. It'll actually work out okay. But I think just consider this as a way to prioritize, because we may have different ideas, but sometimes the city employees may have different ideas. We hear from citizens differently, perhaps, than members of the city. And I think it could also help with prioritization.
I think that would be a good idea, as long as we keep it separate and the council does its own in a vacuum without seeing that, because so that it's not in any way persuasive as to that. And I'm not insinuating what I'm getting ready to say next. You were implying otherwise, but while I greatly appreciate what all of our employees do, we are the elected officials that make those decisions ultimately. So without any further discussion, all in favor of the motion for the strategic plan and the budgeting set prioritizing session or sessions, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. I think that that brings us to an executive, I'm sorry. So we now need, I believe, back to, and Megan, you may need to help me with this, but when we need to look at where we left off with the budget. I think we need a motion. Councilor McCutcheon, who was watching this as well, I think we need a motion from the council to have the budget, the legislation prepared to present it to the council at the next meeting as amended by the council with respect to the $125,000 in capital expense. You want to make that motion, Councilor McCutcheon? Seconded by Councilmember Galani. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion on the motion, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. That takes us to the last item, which is an executive session. And Councilmember Garetano, I have a question for you. Given the late hour, is this something that we need to do this evening, or is it something that could be done at the next council meeting?
It can be done at the next council meeting. Yes, we'll revise the timeline.
I would recommend that we do this at the next council meeting. It is an important item, but it's something that can wait without causing any issue. Would there be any objection to that? Okay, so we're gonna, with no objection, then we're gonna move the executive session to the next council meeting. My apology if any of you showed up specifically for this tonight, but the good news is we get to see each other again. So with that in mind, I think that takes us to the end of the work session, and I would ask for a motion, if no one has anything else, a motion to adjourn. Maybe Councilmember Farmer, your key motion for this evening, Councilmember Farmer. Seconded by Councilmember Dodwell. Non-debatable. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Work session is adjourned, and thank you. Have a great rest of the week.